Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Helen Wagner from University of Toronto, Mississauga, kind of the scientific lead of the project, out of which this collaboration and meeting has come. I just want to, as a first thing of order, acknowledge that we are meeting here today on Treaty 7 land, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai peoples, and also the Nakota First Nations, Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Goodstoney, and the Native First Nation of Tsuut'ina. And it's also personally important to us, for us at our team, to acknowledge that. And these First Nations have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. We're very happy that we've been able to partner with the Kainai Nation through Alvin, First Rider, who is also the president, I think, of the Prairie Conservation Forum.
The chair.
The chair, sorry, I forgot it. The chair, and in that function, he is now joining us from Winnipeg, where he had to go for a species at risk meeting. So please welcome Alvin, First Rider, to officially welcome us to this meeting.
Okay. Nasto not the in this section. So yeah, Alvin, First Rider, the current chair of the Prairie Conservation Forum, and just happy to welcome you guys to this connectivity meeting, and just yeah, really grateful for the partnership that we've been able to create with the University of Toronto with Helene, and then also just how we've been able to advance our relationships with like the Prairie Conservation Forum, having a voice for Indigenous people to be able to speak our truths and being able to share our knowledge in those type of spaces. So I'm really grateful for the Prairie Conservation Forum, the board that invited me, and then how I've been able to kind of build up that relationship and make sure that First Nation voices are heard and that we're included in the conservation world. So yeah, I'm the environment manager for the Blood Tribe land management, and sit on various boards and do a number of projects. And this one of the things is connectivity, so ensuring that there's that connection, but then also that there's spaces for our relatives, the animals that move along Blackfoot territory. So yeah, this project and the meeting here today is very meaningful, and it goes to show how we could co-manage, or we could build relationships and work together as First Nations people and non-First Nations. So just welcome everybody, and I'll be in and out of the meeting today, but just welcome you all to the virtual world, but then also to the people there, the Blackfoot territory. Welcome.
So just a tiny little bit of background on that collaboration and the people who are, you will be hearing from today. And then I'll introduce you on a conceptual, not technical level, to a few key principles related to connectivity, landscape connectivity, what it is, why we should care, and connectivity modeling. And then after the coffee break, it will get a bit more technical. But if there's I will watch out for some blind stares of it. If you feel like I don't understand this term, please let me know immediately. I'm happy to interrupt it. And I really mean that. So I don't mean for you to be able to read this. This is a project structure, NSERC Alliance, or these kind of more community partnership programs funded by NSERC, where the goal is not like NSERC usually funds like scientific research, but the goal of this project is not to create new scientific publications, but to work together with community partners to have that transfer of scientific knowledge to practice application, and of course inform the research again from the applied side problems. And I think we've been doing that. It's been really fun in this project, how we really made that come alive. And that is due to our partners, Prairie Conservation Forum. We're been working with Samantha and with Ruiping, Lou, yeah, and so I think she's online, and with Alvin, and the first writer, the blood tribe for Kainai, the land management of the function, Alvin, first writer, Nature Conservancy Canada, Caitlin C, who's probably also online, Trinity Valley Conservation, that's a partner of ours back in the Greater Toronto area, who's been informing the more urban parts, Greater Calgary area, from the work we've done together back in Ontario, and Miistakis Institute, mostly through Tracy Lee, has been very active in that. And I want those people to acknowledge them now to stand up and show who you are. So, and you'll be the ones that have these kind of, so this is Samantha.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we've got Tracy. We all know who is who. And all I forgot to say, and of course, yes, and most importantly, so these are the collaborating organizations and our collaborators in those organizations, but the partner institutions, the EBMI, who is, and specifically, David Roberts, who was supposed to be here today and had to cancel yesterday. He will be attending online because he has become sick. So he didn't want to spread that to all of us, but I hope he'll get well soon, and I hope he can join us for a few minutes. So this one's set aside with him. And what else do we have? Caitlin and online. But then we have our own team here. Yes, so 3 generations of postdocs in my lab. And a person who kind of co-developed this project is Hossam Abdel, who is now working for the Alberta government. He will tell us what branch. Yeah. Then when as we knew he was going to leave, we took on Ninon Meyer. And as Ninon was on maternity leave, and Sia just finished her PhD in my lab. Sia has been joining us as well. He will start a new job in 2 weeks. So it's kind of been interesting project time, but all together a really great team. And I'm sure I forgot someone now. Grouping, yes, we have one for grouping as well. I think if I forgot someone, I mentioned them earlier. Yes. So that project had all these partner structure, and what we worked on for the last few years was to try to have 3 objectives: integrate advanced connectivity assessment into planning methods, remove technical obstacles to performing connectivity assessment in-house, which has proven a bit more difficult from a number of reasons. And then objective 3, clarify the biological interpretation of different types of connectivity models. That third one is a little bit what I'm going to talk more about in my part. We did all of this in the context of 4 case studies that we designed with our collaborators. So the conversion of native prairie to agriculture. Hossam will be talking about that example. Urban development and natural heritage system, that one in context of the Greater Calgary Connect project, led by Miistakis. Tracy will talk about that, and Ninon. They will also talk about the highway implications of grassland connectivity around Medicine Hat. And then high value landscape connectivity assessment, so kind of grassland connectivity, that's the project that Celia has been working on together with the example with the Kainai Reserve. So Celia and Alvin will co-present on that later today. And so the focus was not on necessarily papers. There's a couple of papers coming out of this, but the focus has been really on trying to produce things you guys can use. And that's also the reason why this afternoon we have more hands-on workshop. And so, yeah, we can let you know a little bit of what to expect when the project will formally end, I think, in January. And by the end, we should have everything up. But it would also be interesting for us to hear a little bit like what is the thing you most want to have as a resource available to you. Okay, so far? Good. So what is landscape connectivity? Why does it matter? The term kind of was defined and coined and then really brought into landscape ecology and ecology in a wider sense in 1993 by Taylor et al. The degree to which a landscape facilitates the movement of individuals or their genes among resource patches. But the interaction between the landscape, whatever that is, and the movement of individuals. So individuals of different species that try to fulfill their life cycle, and that involves moving, for example, between resource patches. And that happens in that landscape that is subject to our transformation and use. And so that's the link to landscape planning. And if we want to conserve species at risk, for example, we need to make sure that the landscape still allows them to fulfill the life cycle. And so we cannot look at just the population locally isolated. We need to also maintain the exchange of individuals and gene flow to maintain viable populations. So that's where the landscape becomes really important from a conservation context. And here we have a good example of like this is really more natural habitat here, probably more balance. Like this has been converted to agricultural use, and this agricultural use here has been converted to urban settlement. And so we have to somehow find all of that with the ecological processes related to connectivity. So here in yellow, this would be kind of corridors, putative corridors, like areas where these organisms could go through. We call that in a more general way, when we don't speak of specific species or so, ecological flow. So just like green matter, this is organisms of any kind, terrestrial organisms, are more likely to follow somewhere through there than they're going to go right through here, right? That doesn't apply to every species, but that's the idea. So why is this important from our kind of human perception? Ecosystem services, just like pollination, rely on that connectivity. Species conservation, I already mentioned, has to consider this. And gene flow is important to maintain those viable populations. So there's several levels at which this really matters in terms of biodiversity, of habitat diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. Now, when we look at that ability of the landscape to allow to be permeable for these organisms, to allow that ecological flow to occur, that connectivity. We need to think, say, like, at what spatial scale are we looking? And so we cannot just look at Greater Calgary area and that as like an island in the ocean of the rest of the world. It's not in isolation. So what we have here is a model, a connectivity model that was done for North America. And like yellow here is heat map kind of thing. Yellow means there is high concentration of ecological flow. And dark blue means like there's no ecological flow. It's kind of a desert in that sense. And if you look at the Canadian prairies, right? That's about the darkest blue you can get on this continent. So we are really here in a situation where there is a really big lack of that connectivity. And this is a model then by the Canadian team that model that is ecological flow all through Canada. And we see again that here, this is a very blue area. We really have a problem of a lack of connectivity across the grassland area here. You already see the southeastern part has a little bit more. That's where you have just the more marginal lands. You have less agriculture, so there's a bit more natural grassland left there. And this is a model that our lab did collaboration with ADMI for the province of Alberta. And we see again here, this is the historical area. So it is also the prairie and the parkland region here, east of Edmonton, and then down here. This is the area where we're really lacking connectivity. We should think about restoring it. So in that kind of, when we zoom in from the continent to half the continent, Canada, to the province, there's, if you think of climate change species moving northwards, that connection along the foothills, through the foothills into the boreal forest is going to be a really important one to maintain. And then we want to improve the connection through the parkland region from the prairie region to the boreal, kind of that is an area that I know the Nature Conservancy Alberta agency, they are really want to work on that. And then also the east-west from the more natural grasslands, the southeast of the province to over here towards the foothills is also would be a priority to think about connections. Just a little thing to point out here. As a landscape ecologist, I will talk about the spatial scale here, the extent, like the extent of the continent or the country or the province. This is political kind of boundaries mostly, which don't really matter to species. So it's at any level, we need to think about cross-jurisdictional collaboration or coordination. And then the other thing is the resolution. The continental one is a 1 kilometer resolution. So the cell size, like saying how built up is this or how natural, is assigned to an area of a square kilometer. So, you know, you can have a lot of variability within that. Then the national one was done at 300 meter resolution and the provincial one at 100 meter resolution. Probably would like to get down to 10 meter, right? Because if you think about the width of a road or so, that is going to be a relevant width. But so we have constraints in terms of computational, how detailed we can go. On the other hand, in Alberta, we have the human footprint inventory by the AVMI, which is like, I think, every other state or province would not even dream of having something like that. So we're in a really, really good position here to do this analysis and integrate it into planning. So on one hand, we have a huge responsibility here for some of the worst situation of connectivity. We can really do good by improving that. And we also have the data-wise, we have the best situation. So why would we have to consider municipality in its larger spatial context, not just like the island? This is an example of those who joined our pre-project workshop a few years ago have seen it. If let's say this is now a township or municipality, they want to protect some area under some program, and they say, okay, this is where we still have kind of a big forest right in the middle of our township, or forest, or here for nice grasslands. We'll kind of protect that and build around it. If every neighboring township does the same thing, what we end up is with nice, relatively large patches of grassland that is not connected. And most species won't be able to kind of move between these. Another thing might be, okay, well, we should set aside a little 20% of the area aside. So let's put that at the edge of our jurisdiction. That's where nobody needs the land, or at least it's easiest for us, put it somewhere on the border, at the margins. Now, if everyone does that the same way, interestingly, we don't end up with high quality, large patches of habitat, but we end up with corridors going north-south. So now suddenly we have connectivity north-south. We don't have it east-west. So you probably get the idea where this is going. If we just do what's convenient, you know, a little bit here, here, and here, where we have still some species left, if everybody does that, we end up with small patches kind of spread all over. The average distance between them is not that big, but they're not connected really, and there's probably not a lot of kind of large, good quality habitat available. And you can, if what's probably most likely to happen, each municipality, each township does it individually. So you get a mix of all these. And yes, we set aside 20% of the land, but it's not done in a coordinated fashion, and it doesn't really benefit anyone that much. Now, if we coordinate it, we could do something like this. So where we have some important existing larger habitat patches, and they are connected to a network that facilitates now connectivity east-west and north-south. And that would be the ideal. That means we want to see like what's our role in the continental, national, provincial kind of scale, and then how do we coordinate with our neighbors? Okay. Yeah, we just minimize the. Oh yes, that would be very helpful. But we are doing that. So almost there. I do that. Yeah, I don't think I can do it, but I think I have very few things up there, so let's hope that works. Thank you. So if we do this more coordinated approach, and examples of applications. Okay, so it identifies where to invest in highway mitigation. So let's say we have a highway going through here, or a planned new highway. And so we can see now where it intersects with these, you can see. It intersects here. Not efficient. So here are the intersections with these kind of corridors, and that's where we would invest into culverts, bridges, whatever mitigation structures. And if we can tell the engineers where we need to have it, we're much more likely to be able to actually get it done. Identify key areas for expanding the network. So this would be, for example, here where we have right, we have two relatively good patches of habitat, but we want to maybe connect them with a corridor or even really improve the land in between and make that one big patch of good grass and habitat. And the third example is compare alternative scenarios of development. So there's a lot of new development here in the south of Calgary. Staying in one of the houses that probably has been here for a few months or not even that. It's kind of amazing for me to see. And so if a new development is planned right across one of these connections, that's not good. But what if we could shift it a little and without big loss to our human use, but a big gain to biodiversity. And so we'll see some examples of that from Tracy and Ninon, and also, thank you, and from Celia and from Alvin today, applications really of this style. You good? That. So now another concept or principle, how much biological realism? There are some models like the ones I just showed you with the continental and Canadian in provincial scale. They are based not on a specific species requirement, but on more or less like just on degree of naturalness. Whereas when we communicate that to biologists, and I'm in the biology department, so my background is actually in geography, but the biologists get really wary about that. Well, because why? Really, the landscape connectivity is a combination, the interaction between the landscape structure and a species movement behavior to and its need to fulfill its life cycle. So it is inherently a species specific concept. So how can we model that in a species agnostic way, like ignoring the needs of specific species? So that's been a bit of an internal debate about the need for how biologically realistic does it need to be? Obviously, as soon as we make it realistic, we're gonna tailor it to one species, but not to another species. We can do that for a few species, but we can't do that for every species. Because what does that mean? In terms of habitat then, what is, patches of good habitat delineate that depends on which species I'm looking for. So what are the habitat requirements? And they may need, proximity of different habitats, insects, for example, to fulfill the life cycle. Or if you think of salamanders and so on, they need the aquatic habitat and then the upland habitat. So habitat requirements, the quality, what is good quality for them, and then patch size, like what's a big enough patch for a home range or for a population, local population. And that really depends on the species. Then when you think about the ability to move between such patches, so that's we call the non-habitat in between the landscape matrix, well, we call it that. You will see that term sometimes. And so the permeability of that intervening landscape. And that depends, of course, not only on the distance, but also on what is in between. Is there a big highway, or is it kind of pasture grassland or something? Huge difference, right? But then the response, so we can think of that then, that cost of moving, the resistance of that landscape to the movement as energetic cost for that organism, for that animal to move, or its mortality risk due to predation or being run over on the road mortality, or simply avoidance. They don't want to go there. They could, but they don't want to go there, and then they're not going to go. So then when we think of specific species, we will need to start about thinking about those things and think about the cost and mortality avoidance. They will be different for young animals than for adults, for example, or they may depend on the season. So it gets more and more complex. And then the movement behavior, well, this is dispersed mobility, like species thresholds and probabilities, how far they're going to go. Like a snail is not going to go as far as a bald eagle, right? Or a wolf. But another aspect is the decision making. Does this, talking about animals now, does this animal who is now here in this resource patch, does it know where it wants to go when it leaves it? Does it just go somewhere? Intuitively, I would think this snail just goes in some direction and doesn't have a complete knowledge of the whole environment where it could go. And that's an assumption that we then model with, Hossam will talk about that with random walk. Like they go a stretch and then they randomly go in another direction stretch and then randomly in another one. And then we can have a kind of probability distribution where they might end up. But then there's other animals, like think of a caribou that has a seasonal kind of migration pattern. They know exactly where they want to go. At least I assume so. So they have pretty good knowledge of the geography. Or hummingbirds, they know exactly the landscape. They have incredible spatial memory. So they know, and they know what's the best path of getting there. They don't just go as the crowd flies. So it seems kind of impossible to do that even for one species. How do we do that for many species? So now let's take the kind of non-biological approach. I think it's intuitive that if we have an intersection of two highways here, that's not going to promote dispersal or movement of any species beyond humans and the dogs in their cars, right? So that's not going to be permeable to most species. Whereas here, where the vegetation is pretty much the potential natural vegetation of the area, that's probably going to be permeable for most species that are used to be here. They have survived here. They're adapted to that kind of landscape. So that's the idea. If the more natural an area is, the more species will be able to move through it. And the more buildup it is, the less species will be able to cross it. So yes, there will be this idiosyncratic kind of response of every species, even life stage, even at the season, that which they respond differently to a specific landscape. But there will be a large, strong kind of shared signal based on just degree of naturalness. And that's the idea of these. We have termed species agnostic model because we don't think of specific species. The only thing what we do is we're thinking of it in terms of terrestrial species, not aquatic, because aquatic hydrological networks are very different. So the idea, the more natural, the higher is the habitat quality, and the less natural, the less permeable. So the highway intersection as being one of the least permeable for most species. And then another thing we've learned over the years from kind of connectivity studies is that species that have intermediate dispersed mobility are going to be the ones that are most sensitive to the landscape structure. Because those that can go for 1,000 kilometers, they will find their way. And those that can only go for 100 meters, our spatial scale of planning connectivity within a municipality or across kind of a watershed or something is not really going to make a big difference for them. We have to manage those much more locally. But it's the intermediate distance ones, those are the ones where that spatial configuration of a habitat network, for example, really matters most. Now, we will see examples, a little bit of everything today. The focus is more on the species agnostic models. They've also been called by these Canadian level authors as multi-species models because they don't focus on one species, but they're not an overlay of detailed species-specific models. Not in that sense multi-species, but they're trying to um, define connectivity like for an unknown group of with the majority of species. Now, modeling approaches, and we'll get to the more technical stuff in the next few talks and the applications. First, I want to acknowledge that we come to this with different perspectives. And one thing we found is important to realize how we see the landscape and where we're coming from, how we see the landscape. So in terms of what we just saw before, if you're coming from a land use planning perspective, you probably can understand, can relate to that species agnostic model. You want one map to work with, right? Because you have to integrate that with all other our human needs. And biodiversity is just, connectivity management is just like one of those aspects. Whereas if you come from conservation, you're thinking, let's say, of pronghorn antelope, and pronghorn has a very different needs than maybe grizzly bear or the bison that we want to bring back and so on, or the beaver. Like they see the landscape very differently. We need different maps for them. And so from as a landscape ecologist, I'd say from species conservation, we take that organism perspective. We try to put on the glasses like of the buffalo. What does this landscape look like for a buffalo? Or what does it look like for the pronghorn antelope? And then map that and come up with a management plan, a recovery plan from that perspective. Whereas from landscape planning, we think of that multifunctional landscape and landscape connectivity of natural habitat. That is just one of these functions. And in between is this perspective on, let's say, of ecological connectivity or different specific habitat types, where we say these aquatic organisms have different needs than terrestrial ones, and grassland prairie species have different needs than boreal forest species, right? So maybe we should, but if we consider the connectivity of grassland habitat and the connectivity of upland forest habitat and aquatic connectivity, wetland connectivity, then if we combine those, we can really do something good for a very wide range of species. Whereas if we do just naturalness, then what works for grassland species might not work for other species. Yeah, and then at whether on the right or the left of this is, are we coming from ecology, like from the science side, or are we coming from the policy side, right? So our lab comes from the science side, and then our collaborators and partners here come from a bit more on average from the policy side, or in between. So just look at the policy side. Policy has to have some legal background. You have to have a mandate for something. So that here top left has to do with ecosystem services. Maybe in the middle it's biodiversity conservation. That's where habitat conservation plays a huge role. And on the right, the species specific perspective, the mandate there is the species at risk act. And so if we come from here, top left, those species agnostic approaches seem very useful. Might start with something like that. If we come from the species conservation and scientific biology kind of ecology side, we would intuitively start with a single species model and say, well, we need to consider multiple species and start overlaying those. And our kind of bit of hypothesis has been that if you really then move towards making these a bit more biological or overlaying many species here, you might be converging towards something a bit of similar solutions. But that's not proven. It's just our hope or our hunch. Don't take that as a fact. So what's behind these different perspectives is also when we look at the landscape as a single map, here is this landscape viewed from a municipal planner. And all you need to see here is we have two categories of natural land covers. One is terrestrial and one is aquatic water. And that's it, right? We don't know what type of terrestrial habitat it is, just that's natural or maybe, not built up yet or might be protected in some way. And then there's a huge resolution in anything man-made. Human footprint particulars here. If you look at the same thing through a map that an ecologist might use, we have a few human land use categories, and then here it's 8, but we have much more distinctions within the terrestrial habitats here and the aquatic, but mostly terrestrial. So then it matters whether this is grassland forest, is this a deciduous forest or mixed or coniferous forest, and so on. What kind of grassland is it? And so together with the perspective also comes the data, the spatial data we are considering. If you want to map species habitat, you probably need something here. If you want to map the degree of naturalness, this is enough because the green here will be natural and everything else will be non-natural, but or semi-natural, and then you have different degrees of human footprint, like on how degrees of naturalness. We good so far?
We do have a question from
Yeah.
on the chat. It's kind of a longer one, but it says, I heard about Audubon's effort to bend the curve through private land actions to conserve the land. What response in predicting wildlife responses to water conservation practices has our own Alberta government been involved in or cancelled? These evaluations include how the wetland policy that influences grassland and wetland restorations in our prairies and northern boreal, also specifically for the boreal wetlands that use satellite and LiDAR for quantifying the modeling, and any successes from the Miistakis Institute and others to engage with the public. See the FOIP from the Water Act Survey, Phase 1, and that was provided by Alberta Wilderness Association. After months, we waited for a summary report to be made public, still not public.
Now, that's a number of questions, and they're all very relevant and good. Now, I'm the last person who should answer those. Would it be okay to file it for now, but make sure we come back to it?
Sure.
And so maybe Hossam, Dave, if we can join a little bit in Tracy, could talk a little bit about aspects of that later on, like in a discussion, so we can bring it up after those maybe. So I don't want to, get rid of the question. I think it's really good, but I think this is not the moment to talk about it like that. But of course, like policy plays a huge role. And we all know that. Yeah. So just a little bit, when we get in coffee break soon, landscape permeability, that's the perspective. Yeah. So we can come from these different perspectives. Either how permeable is that landscape, like in between the parks or so, the protected areas, or more to focus on, here's our network of all the areas that are kind of good habitat, big enough to be relevant resource populations. And we have some protection status of whatever kind. And now let's look at how connected that network is. So it's the ability to maintain metapopulations and stuff. And that's just like with the species specific and species agnostic, that's another thing, like where do people come from? Do they think of landscape connectivity? Connectivity of what? Habitat connectivity. So then they're most likely thinking in this kind of context. Where's the prime habitat? And where are the links between these patches? How connected are they? And where are the links we need to maybe improve or we cannot afford to lose? If we're thinking more of that degree of naturalness, we don't start out with mapping like areas or big patches of natural land. We just want to see across large, like the whole province or the whole country or a continent or a watershed or whatever, like how easy is it like for ecological flow to move through that? And again, these seem as like to be very different approaches. Interestingly, this afternoon, we will learn that they're much more like on a gradient. But we will see examples. The first presentation by Hossam will be in this paradigm. And then the second one about the indicator developed by the Alberta government and ABMI, and Alvin especially. So Dave and Hossam will present that. Is more focused on the where is the habitat and how connected it is. And Celia and Alvin will then present a new modeling approach that came up like 2 years ago that allows to formally integrate those instead of analyzing those things separately. And so just a couple minutes on validation, because that's a question that often comes up, like especially for these species agnostic approaches, the degree of naturalness. Well, does it really? Yeah, it makes sense that there is a shared response, but that across all these species, but is that really relevant, or is that just trivial? And the specific needs of each species is really what we need to represent and cannot be represented. And so there's been attempts to partially validate these models with a wide range of data, from roadkills to genetic data and so on. And the paper has just come out like this week by, now I can't even read it myself. Brennan, yes. And from a paper at Environment Parks Canada, Jeff Bowman at Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. So that group that did this Canadian model, that they now did this huge validation study. And I think it's kind of a meta-analysis of many different studies on mostly large mammals. There's also wild turkey in there, so that would be a mammal, but they included it anyways. And so that was awesome work. And just the key result here, we're not going to go into details. I think Hossam will cover it a little bit more. They analyzed it in 2 ways, the 2 columns here. On the left, what they call omnidirectional. This is this ecological flow across the whole area. So in a tile in the study area, they see like what's connectivity if we let ecological flow go from one end to the other and in the other direction, no matter where these dots here are, these parks. It's just like how can ecological flow move through this whole landscape? And on the right, it's the habitat network thing. So they focused on large protected areas with some kind of protection status across Canada, but they'd have to be no further than 100 kilometers apart to be considered connected. And that's why here the dark, it's different colors than we had before, but again, the dark blue is like a lack of connectivity. In the north, we have some large protected areas, but definitely are more than 100 kilometers apart. I think that's why we have very low connectivity up there. But we have in both of these again, where we are right now is a blue desert. So what they looked at is in terms of data, home range size, does it correlate positively with that modeled connectivity, the probability of occurrence of the species, where the routing of fast movements, like where do they go through when they move from one place to another rather than staying put where they are within a home range or so. And step selection models, that's where you have tracking data, and you see like at every moment where it's tracked, and then to the next one, that's a step, right? It is a certain distance and direction, and you can analyze, are they more likely to move towards habitat or non-habitat or whatever. So that's a more technical term, but it describes the movement over time of a species. And so the different studies that they've been summarizing have addressed one or more of those components. And we see overall, like no matter which of these components and which model, black bear is very well, connectivity for black bear is very well represented by either approach. Whitetail deer, we probably just don't have many studies here, I guess. I don't know. Or it's not well represented. We'll see that with Ninon, whether that's true. But overall, there's a lot of support, I would say, for both approaches here. And in our team, the member is not here now, Viviana Quiroga and Helm, she did a master's project in our project, and she looked at landscape connectivity for breeding birds here in the grassland area, and that she looked at functional groups. So we have now different functional groups in terms of foraging, nesting, or diet. So that becomes now ecologically meaningful interpretation, not just a number of species. And you found these all three traits were significantly related. If you have a higher value here, means they're better represented by the species agnostic model than those species and groups with lower. So in terms of foraging, it was the foliage gleaners and the aerial gleaners that were better represented by the species agnostic model than the ground foraging or category of water, of course. That's a mixed bag. In terms of the nesting, the ground nesting in the grassland were best represented, and least again the other for the tree nesting, which kind of are rarer in the grasslands anyways. And in terms of the diet, it was those that feed on plants and seeds were best represented. The good thing is, like, it's not like the other species that's a mixed bag that comes up. It's really some ecologically relevant groups here that seem to be well represented. And then what about like species of management concern and so on, relevance for which we have a mandate? So if we group those bird species, 65 or 64 species, into species of management concern, 9 of them, and then 55 that were not of management concern in Alberta, we see that on average, the ones that are designated as being of management concern are on average better represented by the species agnostic model than the rest of the species. So it's not like those species of more concern are less represented. They do get represented to a good degree. And same thing with species that are human associated. Yes, those are on average less well represented by the species agnostic model than the species that are not human associated. So that is comforting. The species agnostic model seems to kind of represent those species a little bit better, about which we care more. Doesn't mean it replaces a species specific model for a species model. So that took me a little bit longer than I thought it would, but that's good. I guess that's always how it is. We'll have a break. No, we're good. Oh, I thought I went in, so I was going to end that fit. So we have time for question and discussion, even better. Yes.
My question was, on a couple of maps in showing, there's a severe gap in landscape activity, like in South Alberta. Is that primarily because of the agricultural landscape that's just like taking over the prairie, or is there another reason?
Yeah. So the question, I'm repeating it for those who are alive. That blue desert, we saw that gap go back. It's pretty far back. No matter which map we look at, right? If you go forward, you can show the picture. But we'll get there. Almost there. Yeah, so we have it on each one of those. We see it here, we see it here, we see it here. That's what you were talking about, right? Why is that there? Is that because of the conversion to agriculture, or is it something else? And Hossam will be able to weigh in on that from that one case study. But yes, it is largely the conversion to to agriculture. And when you look at the map of soil suitability for agriculture, for crop farming, there's no one best class doesn't exist because it also takes into consideration climate, and the climate is just not optimal here. But it's like class 2 occurs, and pretty much everything that is that best soil for crop farming that exists in Alberta, almost everything has been converted. Unless it has some protection, or some like Indigenous reserve or something. Yeah.
My question's really similar, but I was also struck by that stark ban in my southern Canada.
Yep.
Quite a bit of it in comparison to the states where there's so much more of it. Like, I don't know who this question is for, but anyone who's that difference, could anyone be data driven, like what data they have versus what data we have?
Good question. I don't think at this scale that matters that much. I mean, for this time you see, we went down, we added data in a buffer around this is the study area. But to do this modeling, you always have to have a buffer area, at least like 25% the width of your study area. So, Bono and Hossam spent a lot of time getting these data, and there is less data available here, but there's also much less even footprint here in southwestern Saskatchewan than in southeastern Alberta. But you see the flows that go down here, we have that bit of desert down here as well. So, and when you think of the resolution of this is 100 meters, this is 300 meters, this is a kilometer, I think those differences in the details of the data are not going to make a huge difference. So I'm sure there's an aspect of that, but I don't think that explains much of what we see. Another thing is like in the US, this part here is kind of the coldest, not the best place to live and to farm. So you don't have a high concentration of people at the northern border. We have a high concentration of people in agriculture at the southern border of Canada. Okay. So there's a very big difference in density of population and intensity of values, I think.
I think also development like the wind turbines, all of these you have way less across the border than Alberta. So you have like grasslands, but you don't have spots that much canola. Maybe grasslands are more friendly. Same grasslands. And the crops.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with down here, the west and then the northwest of the US, so other people please weigh in. Yes.
So the black paper and the different paper is involved in both of those. A big difference between those two papers for those scales is also how the resistance surface is coated. And so
Yeah.
at the national scale is probably excluded with 4 variables.
Yep.
Whereas a lot was coated was a coating with a remember it was more coarse, obviously. There was a much lower resolution. So I think the big difference that you see in those maps and locations, and I can't speak to the one for Alberta specifically, but was how the resistance surface was coated. And that changes how the current, when you push current through that landscape,
Yeah.
it can really change that resistance surface. I think that's a big piece of that puzzle.
Yes, and here they did include a distance threshold where these, I think, didn't. Or
No, neither of those are that perfect.
Yeah.
Like, they used the directional, but these ones were all ones.
Yeah. Yeah, but and all that contributes to differences. But yeah, I didn't want to go into the technical stuff. Also, we'll talk a little bit about those things. We found, for example, that how you treat water has a bigger effect about than the details of your resistance values. But yeah, if you go into detail, there's many details in which all these models differ, and they all have a little bit of an effect. but it seems to be in our sensitivity analysis, that seems to be less relevant than we think.
Yeah, so totally agree. I just wanted to do a quick little tidbit fun fact for the Alberta map as well. Because the ABMI and the Alberta Marine Conservation Board have data on grasslands, many of them are converted into cattle rangeland, which is mostly non-native species. So those are considered rangelands and not national grasslands. So remaining in Alberta, there's not a ton left of natural grasslands. And so how the resistance was supported in that one, like the rangelands, obviously not a super huge footprint in comparison to other things, but they did have a larger resistance value than other natural grassland. So we were able to make that distinction in the provincial model, which is not going to be consistent with those.
Hossam?
Also, like native grassland that will be biodiversity. Historically, coming from Mexico up north to Tobacco, east to west. Also, it is available south to east from the Mexico and the US and up to the southern ocean in Canada. Yeah, this is going to be this and on the other side of the mountainous range. So this kind of foothills area or like this extension in the past was dominated by grassland, and then as development happens and as conversion happens through time, most of these turned into these cycles. So that definitely is one of the factors, and we saw that pattern in the modern grassland conversion in Alberta. So it would be really
That reminds back to the question of like, why is such like, kind of the darkest blue here, as you go further south, the east of the Rockies, it gets warmer and drier. And so I think it's just less suitable for agriculture. That's also probably a reason, because we're like a little bit of the prairies, and it's just the evapotranspiration is maybe a little bit different than if you go further south. Could be also a factor. But all of these things have, I think, a lot of underlying factors. Some they deal with policy and so on. Some to do with the natural environment, like evapotranspiration, and some having to do with the artifacts of how it's actually modeled. Yeah, we can go into details in kind of one-on-one discussions. But I think the big picture, let's focus on the big picture and not the details. But happy to discuss details with anyone who really would like to dig into that. And are there any other questions, or are we good for now? Do we have that policy discussion, bring that back up now, or?
Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
Like,
do you want me to reread it?
Yeah, like an aspect that fits here, kind of, there was a lot of related to policy and what's happening or not happening in Alberta.
Yes. Yes, what response in predicting wildlife responses to water conservation practices has our own Alberta government been involved in or counciled? These evaluations include how the wetland policy that influences grassland and wetland restorations in our prairies and northern boreal, also specifically for the boreal wetlands that use satellite and LiDAR for quantifying the modeling, and any successes from the Miistakis Institute and others to engage with the public.
Yeah, so one aspect is like government, are things being done, or things being like now stopped and not being done? I think that was one aspect I heard out of this. And then the specific of what Miistakis is doing, I think that we could do later. But maybe like the current policy environment, there are things going at the moment in Alberta. I heard a bit out of that, or is the government doing what they're supposed to be doing? And yeah.
I mean, I don't have anything to like Alberta government, but in terms of like Calgary, it's also a bit of a special interest because I love pollinators and I love kind of pollinators. So like, in Calgary, there's like pollinator boulevard, we're like kind of trying to create pollinator that throughout the city to increase the connectivity throughout the city. And the state is looking to using solar farms sometimes, like a means of creating habitat, but it doesn't seem like there's any push to actually like this word, I guess, eventually. It's just seems to be like on a case by case basis. So like if the city really wants to get involved in which that they are, then they're going to invest in more of those projects. But I think it's up to the scientists, the biologists, I guess the public also to have questions and say that hey, we can care about this. So we should be, I guess, pushing for these types of projects to happen from the city and also the province and
So those I didn't hear that, but it's just say to that. What various things are really happening now is in the municipality or kind of a bit larger regional kind of like Greater Calgary area. When you have ecologists and planners and the public and everyone kind of pulling in the same direction, it's amazing what can happen, and we'll hear about that Calgary Connect project. I think it's also very encouraging that the government has published that the indicator, one of the biodiversity indicators, that the connectivity indicator that we will hear from the Roberts and Hossam later. That means it is, we officially care about that, and that the spatial scale of that is the sub-watershed level. So this is not something where the planning happens top down from a whole province scale, but it's going to be the right level is kind of municipality or sub-watershed. That's where this is supposed to happen. And I think that makes a lot of sense. The important thing is to create that momentum, and that was another part where this question aimed at, I think, from the chat is like, what are we doing to get the public behind, like with outreach, to raise the awareness in the public and build that momentum. So we have a number of successful examples to present to you, but that's our coffee break. So let's have coffee together, or whatever you want to have, water, tea. Let's see what's waiting for us.
I am Hossam Abdel. Currently, I'm the biodiversity modeler with the Alberta Environmental Protected Areas and Land Planning Branch. Formerly, I was the postdoc on this great project. I feel like I'm very connected to it, and it's one of my childs that I've been working with Helene and the amazing collaborators and this wonderful group. So, and also thank you, Helene, for providing this background on a lot of different topics that we will be talking about in my presentation today. So I didn't want also to make it very technical, just because the amount of details that we can talk about this is endless. We can take forever to talk about every single aspect. So I tried to stay at a higher level of its explanation of things, just, the bigger picture with a little bit of more flavor into the applications. So what we can do with current density model. So what I was hoping to do through my presentation is to deliver these things. One important note that I want you to keep in mind after Helene's introduction is what we will be talking about today is all structural connectivity. So structural connectivity is informed only from features in the landscape, these natural features and human footprints or human modified features. These are the applications of things that I'll be talking about today. So we have these, this landscape, for example, represents examples of different types of uses. urbanization, natural areas, as you can see with the ravine here and the natural areas around it. Water bodies, agriculture areas, recreational areas. So we will see what that means for current density or modeling current density. So we will go through what is it, the what, why, and how. We work with current density, and we will jump right into some applications. So we will look into large-scale connectivity mappings, and we will look into what matters most at this larger scale, and that will use our first paper, Meyer et al., to modeling landscape connectivity at a large scale for Alberta. And then the second example is current density scenarios. So this tool is very powerful in understanding if we make some scenario changes on the landscape, how we can quantify current density, how we can quantify connectivity that happened due to these different scenarios that we use in managing our landscapes. And then the last one, or the last application that I would like to give you a presentation on is combining current density with other tools of quantifying connectivity for applications in land use, for example. And for that one, we will use our case study that we did with Credit Valley Conservation to show you how we can combine network analysis with current density. And then at the end, because this is a technical part, I will give you some information on what are dependencies for software to do these things or to model current density, and what works for you the best if you want to adopt this or do this in-house. Okay, so that's my plan for today. So jumping right to it, I just want to give a little bit of a history on current density and where it all began. So it started with Dave McRae, Brad McRae, sorry, in 2006. And this study inspired all of these kinds of ideas about modeling connectivity using current density, where he first started to talk about isolation by resistance and landscape genetics and how to understand the genetic flow and genetic differentiation of organisms using different features in the landscape. The biggest step after that was this paper that has all the big names on it. So it had McRae and Dixon, Tim Keat, and Shaw. And this paper started to look into the use of current density in modeling ecological connectivity, right? So it started to put, connecting the dots between circuit theory and how we model electron flow in circuit board and learn from that something related to random walks as if organisms are moving on this giant circuit board in the landscape and how they are going to deal with different resistors and stuff on the landscape, right? Application-wise, this landmark paper came in 2019, and that's what started, the idea of applications of circuitscape and moving from circuit boards and current flow from a source to a sink, and then all these resistances and how we deal with them into current density maps with this famous figure that we will be talking about shortly, and the idea of implementation of some software like circuitscape. It's not the only one, but it's one of the most famous ones for sure.
So can we stop and think that's heard of circuitscape? Most but not all. I just think, like we're talking now about that landscape permeability, ecological flow modeling, kind of that is that context, right?
Yeah. Okay, we're good. So moving on to what is it? What current density? What I really want you to think about it, of course, you might have some information about it and learned about it, but for those who don't know what is it or here to learn something about it, just think of the landscape as a big circuit board with natural features as areas with low resistance, so organisms can move through these areas, and areas with human footprints or with development have higher resistance, and therefore they won't be able to go through these points. So if you think about it from this current perspective, so if you have a source where your electrons will go into the circuit board and come across an area that really have pretty high resistance and then move to another area, right? This higher resistance area is what's going to force all this current to come into, is what we are calling a pinch point. So that's kind of, the analogy from circuit theory to what we use current density for applications in landscape connectivity. What's important here is why we use circuit theory. Helen touched a little bit on some of these ideas, but mainly because metrics matter. When we think of connectivity, usually our brain goes directly to corridors, where animals can use these corridors to move from one part to another in the landscape. But at a landscape scale, connectivity, what matters also is matrix. What's in between these habitat patches? What's connecting these corridors, right? The other important thing as well is when you think from organism perspective, they don't go specific pathway from one patch to another. So all possible or all open pathways that they can take is important. I will show an example of the difference between this current density modeling and least cost path, where you head from one point to another with the shortest possible least cost pathway that you can do, right? So all these different truths are important. And then because connectivity is dynamic and landscape is dynamic and everything's changing in our landscape, it's important to account for these for these values that goes up and down in resistance, right? This limit of landscape to support movement or impediment of organisms in the landscape. So in circuit theory, it helps us to really try first to visualize at the basic level where these ecological flows may happen in the landscape. Can this ecological flow with for example, or these maps with validation data supports our understanding about how animals move in the landscape, how genes flow in the landscape, right? These are important things. From application point of view as well, it's important to pinpoint where these pinch points are, where these constraints, where current is forced to go through this tunnel with a lot of higher values of resistance that is surrounding it. Think about it as a natural heritage system or like a ravine that goes inside a city, where you have just natural areas surrounding that ravine, and then on the sides, all the constructions and all the human footprints. So current is going to be only forced to run through these areas. So what the applications of this in conserving the landscape and maintaining the medium. Okay, so let's see how that works in theory, and then jump right into the application. So think of this as a hypothetical landscape. I'm sorry about the camera. I like to move a lot. So think about this as a hypothetical landscape where you have this matrix and you have a point A and a point B, and you are an organism want to move from point A to point B. This is the heaven for you. This is the heaven. These are habitats for you. In between, you have, a little bit of idea what's going to happen. Water. I'm talking about terrestrial landscapes. So water for me is electric shock. I'm going to die if I go to water. So this is really high resistance. So if you think about this from this resistance surface, we can assign values or judge what each feature on the landscape would have a value as a resistance. So my habitat will have the lowest value, that is the best condition for me. Metrics may have, okay, kind of, some will work, some may not. So for the simplicity, we just say it's 2 here. Water is bad, bad, bad. So it's 10, right? And let's think of an organism that knows what he wants. So in least cost pathward, I want to move from point A to point B. So I'm going to calculate the shortest coast path that will take me from point A to point B. But does animals and organisms see the landscape this way? Can they calculate what's gonna happen? Maybe not, right? So the other alternative is all possible patterns. So if I'm gonna go from this point to this point, I should consider what this landscape means to me. What are these resources for me? Can I move here or not? Some feature will support the movement of some animals and plants. Some features may not, right? So there's a lot of variation. And then when we think about this analogy in current density work, so our resistance maps will look something like this, right? What you see here, the black color or high values of resistance are areas that current cannot pass. And then areas with lighter color or with white represent, for example, habitat patches and natural areas where current can flow. And then in the current density work, if you think of high current density is yellow, and then low current density or no movement is blue, you can see here, for example, if you look at this as a road, there is a pinch point here. Current needs to flow from this side to this side. This is a barrier. It's only can flow from here, and then this, therefore, is an important point for me to look at in this landscape. This could be a culvert. This could be an underpass. This could be a wildlife corridor that passes or allows organisms to move from this side to this side. Areas like this, for example, is kind of, a diffused area, kind of an okay area where car can pretty much go anywhere, right? Areas like this are like low current density areas where we can think about it as high resistance that will not allow the current to go. We will talk more about how to interpret current density maps, but yeah.
Just again to help translate, so current here is like movement of organisms or ecological flow, right? So when we have this yellow, that's where we expect to have a lot of channels concentrated movement. And blue is when we expect less, a little movement across.
Yeah. The point that Helen mentioned, okay, so we kind of understand now the general idea of current density and how it works and this way. In current density modeling, that's why I said like there is a lot of details that I'll try to simplify and mention just the important ones for the sake of time and this meeting. But please reach out if you have any questions or want to discuss a little bit more about different things. I think we talked about the different types of current direction, omnidirection or P2P, like patch to patch. It's simply where you put your current source, where you put your nodes, right? So in this approach, for example, this is also from Brennan et al. In 2025, a couple days ago. The important thing here in this type of modeling is that when you put your nodes at the outside, two important things we want to do. This approach is used for directly comparing scenarios or directly comparing current flow across maps or in different study areas, right? So you want to maintain the same amount of current, and you want to make sure that when current is modeled or when the simulation of this random walks or this electrons movement and the circuit board will happen, it will consider each single one. So at the end of the day, they are comparable, right? Another approach of this similar directions is when you put your nodes around, but you ask the software to converge at a point where you won't have significant difference in your current density map, in your solution. So the electrons will start to move, and once you start to build this current density map, so it will connect one point to another point, to another point, to another point, and so on, until you reach a current density map that after this point, not much significant change will happen, and it will stop. So it doesn't necessarily use all the nodes, and it doesn't necessarily do all the steps, right? But in this omnidirectional scenario, it's kind of, homogenize or standardize the flow so you can compare directly. Here it's a little bit different story. So you put your nodes or your electron, like your current sources at the patches and kind of, see how the current dispersed from this patches to the surrounding area. Software where we can do current density modeling, the kind of, the most famous one, Surfacecape. There are a lot of different types of software, but the other famous one also is GFlow that has much more capacity for larger maps and computation resources. Enough talking about the backgrounds and methods and how we do it. We'll go now directly into some applications of how we model current density for different purposes. So the first one that we are going to look at today is large-scale connectivity mapping that we did for Alberta, where we developed the very high detailed resistance layer that we used to model current density to understand the general patterns of ecological flow in Alberta. So I think most of us now are familiar with what this looked like. So this will represent a resistance layer. That's the resistance map. This came from assigning different values to human footprints and natural areas, and then look at values of resistance. So this is our Alberta boundary. What you see beyond this is a buffer that we used to kind of, account for overflow of nodes. Nodes should be here. You will see them in a different figure. So when the current starts to flow from here, we want to account for the current density that is just caused by the location of the nodes. And this buffer is usually 20 to 25% of your area of interest. So you collect data or like fill this space with some arbitrary resistance values, and then that will account for your current density. The maps would look like this. So GFlow or Surfacecape takes your resistance layer as an input, will place the nodes. You can see now where the nodes are placed, right? So there is a lot of current coming here, and that's why we put this buffer. So we end up with a clean kind of less impacted current density map away from the source. So this is your current density map. Other treatments that we do to these maps is to standardize them. So the idea there is just to look at this ecological flow pathways, where these networks are, and we kind of, maybe change the symbology and the color map a little bit just to highlight where these connectivity routes are. You can see some remaining pieces here in the grassland areas, the southeast corner, the foothills area, and the important connection to the north, the boreal with the foothill and the parkland area. So this is kind of, the map that you look at to understand where is the ecological flow at a larger scale. So how do we interpret these maps? So here is the image that I mentioned a minute ago, where we replace our nodes. So this is your resistance map. It is your current density map. But if we want to really understand what this is, let's have a look at it from like a satellite image. This is the Fish Creek Provincial Park. This is, I think, exactly some highway features here in the Top Gun open area. So, yeah, let's overlay our current density map on top of this, right? So what you can see here, Fish Creek here is a natural area that is surrounded by these high resistance values of urban areas. Then the current is forced to go here. This is a very important area to maintain. If I lose this, I lose all the connectivity in this part, right? Areas like here, for example, the Top Gun area, that's sorry, the Two Gun, Top Gun. This is a kind of an open area, natural area where the current can pretty much go anywhere. So you see this pattern of kind of diffused current, right? There's not enough modified features or human impact to kind of constrain the current to go in a certain area. Water here, for example, we said that this is a terrestrial current density map or based on terrestrial organisms. So water is a high resistance value. So you see this black or kind of dark blue spot in your map. So yeah, so that's illustrating the Fish Creek area, your Red Deer Lake, and then here your two guns opening. So that's kind of how we interpret these maps. There is a lot of decisions that you need to make when you model current density, right? I think Helen also touched on that, but I just want to show you like a couple quick things here without going into too much details. Two important factors that we looked at in this particular paper or in this exercise is human modifications and water resistance, right? Water can be or can form a very high resistance to some organisms. And in some situations, some organisms can pass like little creeks and whatnot. How we look into human modification is simply how we accounted for the penalty that we give to human features. So we look here at the footprints themselves. So we use the intensive human footprint data set from ABMI and used about 101 different human footprints. So this was just human footprint, account for human footprint. And the different resistance values that were assigned to human footprints came from the Geospatial Science Committee with expertise, people with and expert opinions about how we should assign a value to these different features in the landscape, right? The U maps represent the intensity of use. So think about it as a road, for example, or a linear feature. Some of these linear features are intensely used by humans, or has a high resistance value. Think about it as a highway versus, for example, a dirt road in a countryside, right? So the amount of use of that particular footprint. And the UF in the middle is kind of an average between these two. So the idea here is to understand, is it the footprint, the existence of the footprint and its resistance value? Is it the intensity of use? Or is it the kind of, an in-between value that is more important? For water resistance as well, we accounted for water as a minimum resistance, so we gave it a smaller value for resistance, medium resistance, and maximum resistance, as if it's not like a complete barrier to move. And we looked at these different combinations, and our analysis showed that the correlation between, so these are the comparisons, and then the amount of variance explained in each different combination. We see that human footprint is definitely an important factor that determines the differences between the maps. Water resistance is also important, and scaling is also important. So these three factors that we looked at, I'm showing just two here, but scaling is to what degree you want to contrast the resistance in your landscape versus natural areas, for example. This is species agnostic approach. So it's the function that describes the intensity of resistance in an area, right? We can talk about the details later. If you have questions, we can address them later, but I just wanted to, leave you with the idea that it's not just having a map, call it a resistance, run it through a software, and end up with a current density map. There are important decisions that you need to think about carefully when you use current density to represent ecological development.
And just to link to the question we had before, and if you look at the vertical, the F and left view, we did the comment and we ended up using the middle row and the combination of like degree of deviation from naturalness, that's the footprint, and the intensity of use. Whereas the continental model and the Canadian model, they just looked at footprint. And so you can see at the top row, you have much more of your black desert than at the bottom. So that actually it has a big effect on the outcome. Probably more so than when we have very detailed differences in resistant values, or we just have the quality difference. Think about the provincial models.
Thank you. Okay. So that was the first application. Moving on to the second application, with current density and studying scenarios. Okay, so we have a scenario. We have a vision of a certain land use that is going to happen, or decline in certain types of habitat that is going to happen. If I was able to model these scenarios, I should be able to understand what does that mean for connectivity, how that translates into connectivity. So what I'm going to present to you now is our second paper with these diversion trends of converting grasslands into agriculture. And this work was partially funded by Beef and BCRC, Beef and Cattle Research Council. And the idea here is we know that grassland is really impacted with a lot of different modifications, whether or changes in the landscape, whether it's to agriculture or to different types of human impacts. And we want to understand.
There is a technical problem that people online can't see the slides anymore.
It is being shared, so that's weird. Is it still being shared through Teams? Okay, maybe it's me.
Just share screen again.
I'll leave and come back.
Yeah.
You have the same thing. Oh, yeah, no. I have an old laptop and. Yeah, we just lost the presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we. So.
Oh, like Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi.
Oh, here. Okay.
That's a good reminder. So if anybody's here, it's the Wi-Fi. It's the network is seeking special events, and the password is ground up with a capital G on the ground and a capital U on top.
And the dash in between.
Yes. So I'll just repeat that one more time. So it's the network is CP special events, and the password is ground up with a capital G on ground and a capital U on top.
Celia, yes, let's type it in here.
Yes.
I just heard dash.
See here. Just need to share it then. Yes.
He said that to let me again. Okay.
There we go. Okay, so if you just share, then it should. Yeah. Good.
Okay, we're back. What's happening?
You did turn your volume off again.
And mute yourself as well.
Test.
That's good.
Okay, so into our second application. So scenario modeling with grassland. So we want to understand how our impact on habitats will, like, how do we impact these habitats and what does that mean to connectivity? So that happens through scenario model. This example is on grasslands. And what we wanted to do here, our objective here is to understand and also assess the impact of converting native grasslands into croplands. The focus here is going to be on grasslands and this southeast corner of the province. We said that we will do scenario model. And then our question, so this goes back to your thinking about, different factors that you need to account for when you do these types of models, right? So here the focus is grassland. You are thinking about scenarios, what's going to happen to these grasslands, mainly like impacted by agriculture. So you should have some sort of a way to determine which grassland is going to convert first, which grassland is going to be converted first into agriculture. And then the accumulative impact of converting more grassland into agriculture or any other land use type, human impacted land use type. So this progressive transition of this particular habitat grassland into a different type of habitat and the impact of that on landscape connectivity, on grassland connectivity. So this is exactly what we did here. So we used the land suitability rating system. That's a national system that looks at the land suitability to agriculture. And it looks into different features in the land, soil, moisture, chemical characters, physical characters, and they also rank these different areas into whether they are less suitable for agriculture or can be or more suitable for agriculture. So lower numbers mean they are more suitable for agriculture. So we assume that it makes sense that these lands will be the first ones to be converted into agriculture from grassland, followed by the less suitable, and then the less suitable, and so on, right? So this is how we kind of approach it that. And what we started with is looking at this map for our grassland area. So you have here the grasslands, and then I want to create these different scenarios. So first of all, I converted everything in class 2 that is more suitable for agriculture into agriculture. So this initially used to be a grassland. There were grassland areas here. They were converted into agriculture. Then I came up with my first scenario. Then I converted 2 and 3, right? Then and 4, then and 5. So I built this kind of progressive scenario. I know we might be a little bit out of time, but I'll try my best to go through. So very quickly, you create your scenarios from the land suitability rating system. Then you create your resistance layers. Again, as you can see here, black areas are high resistance, low or light areas are low resistance. So these are different scenarios. And kind of at a glance, you can tell that maps get darker with progressive scenarios. So resistance increases with grassland conversion into agriculture. And then you come up with your, or you do your model and come with your current density. So what we see here, with less intense grassland conversion, you have these corridors, you have these important ecological flow networks that connects the remaining of grasslands in the area. And as your scenario progresses, you lose a lot of this connectivity and very few remnant high important areas will show up. And these are the top priority, or these are very important to maintain, so you keep some level of connectivity in the land. So that is the idea. Here is the maps at a larger scale, and you can also see here. So ignore these two. I can explain what these are later if you would like to know what these are. But these are our scenario maps, right? And then if you look at this network, you see that it's kind of diminishes as the intensity or the progressive scenario of grassland continues, and this enables us to quantify really the current flow or the important directions of the current or ecological flow that remains. And then in the map here between grassland and parkland, we identified these corridors that Helen showed on the maps. Here you can see these foothills areas, and what remains here from the grassland to parkland are very important areas to maintain, to keep that grassland connected. So and this is kind of quantifies the amount of current deviated in each different natural region in the province. Okay, how are we doing on time?
It's 11:15, so probably running low. There's a couple questions though. Online, how does this work for something like the Central Parkland, where 95% of grasslands were converted to agriculture already 100 years ago?
Yes, so that looks into the historical conversion of grassland, right? So when we did this modeling, we considered the available grasslands. So that is a very good question to talk about these two maps, right? So these two maps now, this null model map represents naturalness only. So this as if everything was grassland or everything was natural, and the only resistance in this map is just due to topology. So the altitude, or like the mountains region, as you can see here, mountain regions are kind of blue, and water body, right? So this is kind of the null model.
But sorry, Hossam, in that case, would it be diffused?
Which one?
The null model?
Yeah, it's kind of diffused on the high end, so it's mostly like yellow. You can't really see it here with the zooming out, because it kind of clusters the color in pockets. But yeah, it's kind of diffused usually. But what creates this is only the water resistance and the topography. In the status quo one, this is kind of the current situation. What we have now, this is the data that we have now showing the grassland. So whatever is lost from here, whatever grassland is lost from here is present in this map. And what is remaining is what we know now is happening. This is a current version of the landscape. The question about historical grasslands, I think we can reconstruct the grasslands from a specific step in these maps. So, for example, if I start here and I know that there were areas that were dominated by grasslands that historically has disappeared, and I have a scenario or a theory where these areas are, I can change the resistance maps in these areas, run the model again, and see where are these areas or how that impacted the large scale cleanup.
Okay, and then the other question was, can you please explain again why the 25% buffer is necessary? How could you modify the analysis if your input data was limited to your area of interest?
For the first part, the buffer is used to account for the overflow that is coming from the nodes when you place them for the model itself. So think about it as your area of interest is a circle, and then if you put your nodes just around these circles, then you will impact the values of the current density just because you placed your nodes in your area of interest. But if you really want to kind of cancel the effect of the overflow that is coming from the nodes, the literature said, Dixon et al., they suggested 20 to 25% buffer around your area of interest to account for that overflow.
20 minutes for this talk and the next talk.
Okay. I will skip this one. So this is putting together the, yeah, I will skip. This is putting together a current density and network analysis.
Yeah, we have examples and of that later. So
Yeah.
that's fine.
So final slide.
I had a quick question. For the current density approach, is it, I guess, what is the advantage of that approach versus other density-based approaches like random bias random walks, bias directional random walks?
Can we talk about this later?
Sure.
Okay. Okay,
So
so,
later treat it as a continuum between least cost path and random walk.
Okay.
Right now, look at one or the other.
okay, so last word on software and dependencies. So what I want to share with you here with these types of modelings, you have some sort of complexity in the software, moving from more complex to less complex. Scalability, if you are working with a small area versus a very large scale or a continental scale map, and then capacity in terms of the capability of software to run at a larger scale. Most of the applications in-house now with ArcGIS Pro can be done there with Python coding. So a lot of different things you can use if this is your thing. If you only have access to ArcGIS, you still can do a lot of these different things. But for example, software like Brackham that works on all these different platforms, but it's the simplest in terms of complexity, scalability, and capacity. You go up a little bit higher with Linkage Mapper that's implemented in ArcGIS, but it's only Windows-based. So if you are a Linux or Mac user, you won't be able to do that. The biggest star with current density modeling is Circuitscape. Works with all platforms, and you can enhance its performance with Julia. And also at the end is Gflow, but that only works with Linux. And it's, in terms of scalability, that's kind of, the higher one that you can go with. Network analysis, there are software like Conifer, but also you can do most of these things, and R depends on, where you, the size of your area, the data types that you have, and so on. So this is it for me. I know that was a little bit too much. As I said at the beginning, I know that there is a lot to share, but I tried to keep it as simple as possible. Please, if you have any questions or follow-up, let me know. Thank you.
Apologies, I couldn't be there in person today. I do the service of not spreading my germs in the room. But we're just presenting a landscape connectivity indicator, which is a bit of an alternative approach here. And it's relevant because it's the collaborative work between ABMI and Alberta Environment and Parks that informs the land use planning frameworks. And so Hossam and I are going to talk about this together. We were going to bounce back and forth, but I'm just going to tee it up and then I'm going to be quiet and I'll just answer questions in the chat as they come up. The quick shout out here is to the technical work done by Brandon Allen at the ABMI and then in collaboration with EPA's Biodiversity Science Committee, who really drove the work forward. From the great presentations this morning, we don't have to cover the background slides at the beginning of this one, which is great. And so we can probably skip right to talking a bit more about how this indicator operates a bit differently than some of the functional circuit-based processes that Hossam was just talking about. Sam, I can keep talking while the slides come up, but I'm just filling time now.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much,
No problem.
Dave, for joining us and for all your support. And really that shout out to, this is really important work that Brandon Allen has done most of that technical development work of that indicator. And then of course a working group with the government to design and implement this indicator.
Yeah, so
Yeah, and the technical documentation is all published for this via the government too. So that's why we can gloss over some of the technical details quite quickly here. But people for sure can reach out if they'd like questions, and I'll be in the Q&A chat there.
thanks, David. Yeah.
Thanks, Hossam.
Yeah. Okay, so I will just go quickly through this and skip parts that we don't need for the sake of time. But definitely, please reach out if you need to have a conversation or you have any question. So the plan was to present some examples of indicators that we use in the land planning branch and in Alberta environmental protected areas, and focus more on the landscape connectivity as an indicator, as a biodiversity indicator. So just quickly on land use framework. So in 2008, the land use framework approach came to manage public and private landscapes in Alberta at these 7 land use framework units, and then it focuses on the fact that good land use decision requires a lot of data and requires understanding to the environment that we are dealing with and the accessibility to different information. So environment and protected areas started to share a cross-ministry effort, scientific effort to the scientific committee to monitor and report on a suite of different biodiversity indicators that will help us, or the focus is to first be able to monitor biodiversity through these indicators and report on these different biodiversity indicators and monitor them through time as land use changes. Also, other members are involved in this from Forestry and Parks. ABMI, of course, is a big partner there, and Alberta Energy Regulator are also members of this committee. So quickly, there are 4 different working groups that kind of, develop data and maintain data for these biodiversity indicators, develop different indicators, update our current indicators, monitor and report on the biodiversity indicators. And this specific one, I kind of, lead the work there, the footprint recovery work group that looks into the recovery of these footprint features in our landscape as reclamation happens. So here is the 4 different indicators that are published and calculated at the HUC 8 watershed level. These are the native cover, interior habitat, landscape connectivity, and stream connectivity. I will skip these ones and just go to landscape connectivity, as this is the focus for today. So the purpose of this particular indicator, or the landscape connectivity indicator, is to kind of quantify the fragmentation of the natural habitat in the province. The way we looked at this, or it has been looked at, it was not me, I was, did not join yet, but there was three different main habitat types: upland forest, lowland forest, and grasslands. So these are the three different types of habitat that were considered for calculating connectivity. And the idea there is to provide this indicator about the state of connectivity of these main three habitat types, and an aggregate form of combining these together, what landscape connectivity look like, and be able to monitor the changes in landscape connectivity. We talked about these two approaches. So the network theory approach, where you look into habitat patches, connections between habitats, so these are the lengths, or this kind of current density modeling approach. Both of them are based somehow on resistance and the distances between nodes, or the distances between these patches. But the current the provincial landscape connectivity indicator uses the network approach in modeling these connectivity for the three different habitat types. So here's also an idea about the different data that was used for these models. Of course, the AVMI human footprint data inventory, that is a huge data set, very high resolution, world-class data set that I don't think like it exists in most of the countries. The vegetation layer and the backfill layer, because the indicator itself, as you'll see in a minute, will require a visualization of the connectivity situation in absence of footprint. If this footprint did not exist in the landscape, what is the land cover? What's the native cover that was there before that footprint? So this backfill layer is kind of the source of information for that. And then some information also about how organisms can move between the habitat patches. And one important data set that was used here is wildlife crossing locations from national parks that kind of informed the probability of moving between patches or between habitat patches. Not going to go much into details or like the computational details of the metric itself, but it's the equivalent connected area, and it's simply if you have this network of fragmented habitat patches, and each one has its area. If you can think of a single habitat patch area that represents the sum of these fragmented ones, that would represent the equivalent connected area. That has to be done in reference to a reference condition. And that reference condition is the situation of the landscape in absence of the footprint. We will talk a little bit about the different components. That is, a little bit of high level. So in this indicator, it have information on patch size, distance between these patches, as you see through the network itself, the spiritual abilities of organisms, how they can move between these patches, and the resistance of movement. So what this link means, or the resistance in this link means for these different organisms. And then, of course, that happens in reference to a reference condition. So what is the reference condition? The reference condition came from the absence of footprint layer, which is the backfill, right? So we wanted to know the one large area aggregated of these patches in case of there was no fragmentation, or these areas were not impacted with human footprint. So that's where the de-footprinted kind of layer that we used, the backfilled layer used to come up with this reference condition for that particular indicator. What impacts this? So forget about the map. What impacts the equivalent tree criteria? So we talked about these different components. Patch size is important. If you have larger patches, that will create a larger equivalent connected area. Proximity patches, how close these patches are to each other, directly or positively correlated with equivalent clear-cut area. Dispersal limitations, so if you cannot disperse far enough, equivalent clear-cut area, acronyms, the equivalent connected area will be smaller and so on, right? So these are important things to think about for this particular indicator. The idea also there is from reporting and monitoring perspective, we want to be able to communicate this knowledge to decision makers. So how to summarize this in a one number that can reflect an attribute about the situation of connectivity at the hot level, right? So it allows the comparisons, and also it identifies areas at the hot shade level where connectivity is low or high, or we need to do something there. Yes, it supports decision by scenarios. So also, if you think about, an area where there, some land use is going to happen, how that can impact connectivity if you look at it from the equivalent connectivity area in absence of. I'm not going to go through details here, but I just want you to know that this particular indicator accounted for human footprints, all different types of footprints, and the resistance values that we talked about. That was published in American Cow paper, so that informed the resistance values. But the modeling approach is a different approach from current density. This is a network approach. Another thing that was looked at is land cover, the different types of habitat. And here we said we focus on the upland, lowland, and grassland main habitat types. That's the same here. So you look at. So to pick up where we stopped, so I just want to share a couple of results slides with you, just to kind of help with the equivalent connected area metric. So these are different examples of degrees of connectivity. Looking at one single connected area here with 100% connectivity according to the equivalent connected area. If that area or this patch is fragmented somehow, but the patches are in close proximity to each other, connectivity drops, but not much, right? But if you look to a scenario here with high fragmented but low coast, so the coast here is low, so you think about this as good matrix between these habitat patches. So it will maintain some level of connectivity. Yes, it's fragmented, but these links are important, and organisms can move kind of, to some extent here. And here is an example of like a bad scenario where you have a high fragmented and high coast, and these patches become really isolated from each other, a bigger spatial extent, and then connectivity kind of really drops. These are examples of what the connectivity indicator look like or can report at these three different main habitat types that we looked at: grassland, lowland forest, and upland forest. And again, each one of these, the important piece here is to interpret this map in the context of the main habitat type. So in the grassland mainly, you kind of, look at this area and kind of parkland here a little bit. Lowland, again, mostly this area, and upland first is where the boreal area is. This is also used to for monitoring purposes or comparisons, as we mentioned. So this is kind of, the aggregated connectivity measured at these hot units.
I think I would just keep going.
And then we calculated again in 2021 with the updated footprints and so on. Created these two maps and kind of, calculated the percent change. So it helps kind of, monitoring and reporting on connectivity status at the Huckstreet level for the programs. Quickly, two examples of what a good connected Huck unit may look like. So this is kind of, a better than most Huck unit that is in the Rocky Mountain and Foothill region. It has low human footprints, as you can see these red colors on the map, and higher connectivity. Connectivity here was calculated with ECA to be 81%. So this mainly is driven by the concentrated human footprint in the map, so it's not really spread all over, and then the large patches, large habitat patches. But we can also see example of a hut that is worse than most in terms of connectivity. But what I want you to pay attention to here too also is that for human footprints, not always low human footprint will translate into high connectivity. Low human footprint can, from the ECA perspective, can also be or can also lead to low connectivity if these linear features are dense and kind of, close to each other, and then these patches or the leftover in between is kind of, large enough. And you may see this as kind of, red all over, but this is again, the kind of, the linear feature when they zoom into that level, kind of, we get this spread, but it's mostly impacted by also, I think, seismic lines. So both jobs. So this is a final note. So all these indicators are publicly available here. So I will leave a QR code at the end so you can scan those with the landscape connectivity indicator per se. For the sake of this presentation, is a biodiversity indicator that is useful for regional and sub-regional level, using the Huck-shaped 8 units as units of calculations. And it's important to also think about from limitation perspectives that these approaches are species agnostic also approaches, does not look into requirements, ecological, biological requirements for species, but it was thought of as an umbrella or a general way of looking to how we can use naturalness to support the movement of organisms. Like, for example, this may not speak much about migratory birds, for example, or species like that. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you very much. And let me know if you have any questions.
So we'll do one talk now.
We're good, David?
Then we'll do lunch in the hour, and we have a buffer in the afternoon, so we'll just start a little bit later and do one talk then, and proceed your hands.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I didn't understand, you said it was a network approach. You said it was a network approach. I didn't understand what the patches, how you decided on the patches. Is it like habitat? It's not fragmented?
So the batches themselves for each type of main habitat type. So we have the upland forest, lowland forest, and grasslands.
Yes.
Each each one represents a bunch of plant types or habitat types that become clustered into these three categories. And each one now is represented by the badges that represent these types of habitat. So when you model the connectivity in this network approach, it's done separately for upland forest and lowland forest grasslands. So we have a map for each, and then an aggregate that kind of, it applies area weight for the batches themselves and the area of the hot unit to calculate the overall. The method itself and the explanation is available in the itself. If you have specific questions on those, we can have more discussion and connect with Brandon from the.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Ninon Meyer. You can say Tracy. I used to be a postdoc in Helene's lab. Can you hear me well? Yeah. And this is.
And I'm Tracy Lee. I'm the Director of Conservation Research from the Miistakis Institute.
Yeah, and now we're going to be pretty brief, but we're going to present you two case studies about species-specific applied connectivity conservations in Alberta that we've been working on the last couple of years in the scope of this big project that Helene presented, but then essentially it was Miistakis. Stop talking. Okay. I can skip this because Helene really talked about it before, just to remind you that connectivity is really, it depends on many parameters, and there's, in a nutshell, there's no one size fits all. So it's usually a trade-off between what we want to protect, what's feasible, because of like different reasons, and also what works for the most species as well. You can imagine that a connectivity developed for rattlesnakes might be quite different from a connectivity model developed exclusively for data.
Okay, so I'm going to be introducing the two case studies that we wanted to highlight today. And the first one was to try to delineate an ecological network that could be integrated into municipal planning in the greater Calgary area. Did you? So we focused on working with Rocky View County and Foothills County, which you can see on the map here, are in kind of a pink and yellow color. And these are the two largest geographies around Calgary. And I want to say that the city of Calgary has developed its own ecological network, which they have in their municipal development plan. And if you're interested in that, Heather Rudd is here today. You can wave Heather, who was pretty instrumental in that process. What we see from the network in Calgary is that a lot of the network runs out of Calgary into neighboring jurisdictions. And so I think you can understand pretty quickly that if we're going to maintain movement in this area, we have to have coordination between the neighboring jurisdictions. So what we're presenting today is the start of a very long journey. So don't think we've solved this problem, but we are having a good start. And so I just very quickly, there is supporting provincial policy, and you've already heard it be mentioned today. For our region, it's the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan. And what's important about this is it does talk about maintaining wildlife habitat and connections for wildlife within this plan. And what's also important is that municipalities or counties have to align with the SSRP, which means we've got supportive provincial legislation and we've got an in for counties and municipalities to be thinking about the importance of connectivity. Next, please. Thank you, Ninon. And this is, I've pulled this from the Rocky View County Municipal Development Plan, and I just want you to pay attention to those lower area right here. These are the types of plans and policy where we want mention and integration of ecological networks. And so the intermunicipal development plan, that's obviously really important because it talks about that jurisdictional neighbors, right, with your jurisdiction. So if the city of Calgary is investing in maintaining a network and it runs into Rocky View, we need coordination with Rocky View. And that would occur in an intermunicipal development plan. And I happen to know, correct me if I'm wrong, city of Calgary people, that I believe by 2027, we're going to have updated intermunicipal development plans between Calgary and its neighbors. So this is an important opportunity. Municipal development plans are kind of the big visionary document for your county, and it directs development for the next 20 years. So it's super important. And one of our goals is to try to get the ecological network into municipal development plans that were being updated for Rocky View and Foothills County. And then I'm not going to spend time on them, but land use bylaws and area structure plans are other pieces of planning and policy that I think we need to get language into for us to be really trying to integrate these concepts into the planning and decision-making within municipalities. So before I pass it off to Ninon, just a reminder, our goal was to develop a terrestrial large mammal ecological network that could be integrated into planning. And we chose terrestrial large mammals because the representatives from the municipality felt like their communities value having these species on the landscape, but they also have coexistence issues through motorist safety risks with vehicle collisions. And then there's coexistence issues on the agriculture landscape. So it was felt like this is a good place to start and will resonate with our communities.
Oh yeah, and just as a reminder, I did this, yeah. When we talk about ecological network here, we mean it's like a system with 4 areas, like we showed before, like where the habitat patches. Stepping stones, these are like the smaller patches, which are a bit too small for having like a viable population of a certain species, but that animals still can move through to connect to another larger area. And biological corridors, obviously. And I'm just going to talk to you briefly about the modeling approach that we use. So we started with land cover data. Okay. This is the Bow River watershed. We used it because it was developed by the Miistakis and it was top-notch. It was 10-meter resolutions, the most recent data. And here you have the Greater Calgary region area. Black outline. It's Calgary in purple. And so Calgary is purple because that's essentially yellow. And green is forest and yellow is that's grasslands, agriculture, and these are grasslands. And then because we didn't have so much data of the large mammal species, we used presence only data that were available from the RICS data sets and also a couple of camera trapping surveys that were done by UFC and the Miistakis Institute, and they are treated as presence-only data. So, for example, this is just the approach that I use for one species, say the cougar. So we overlay like the occurrence, but with a land cover data, and then we develop the habitat suitability models. So in green, that's where you have higher suitability habitat, say for the cougar. So that's like in the mountains, and it's not very suitable as you go further east, where it's like lowlands, mostly agriculture, and grasslands, which we then translated into landscape resistance. Again, there's like different methods to do that. We use exponential negative functions, and we use circuit theory to have that we then clip to have like the current density for cougar in the Greater Calgary area, and it's essentially we have higher flow obviously on the west. And then because we wanted to work with several species, so that when Helene was talking about like structural connectivity or species specific, we've also developed the same model with mule deer and moose. And every time where there's like more current density, like so a higher likelihood of movement flow of the species, it changes between them. So for example, the mule deer, you can see that Calgary is actually not that bad. And that's because a lot of occurrence data that we have, I mean, you guys know, in Calgary, you often see mule deers in the city, like in the parks, and they are more generalist than others, more specialized species. And so Calgary is actually not that bad for the mule deer, and for the moose, not as good, but they also still occur, and we didn't have many presence points also in the agriculture areas and then further east. And so this is where they mainly occur. And because we could not present this to the planners, I mean, what were they doing with all of these formats? They didn't know how to interpret it. So we thought, okay, let's also have like a structural connectivity to see where there's like the most natural land that remains in the landscape. And so we use the same approach as that Hossam has shown before. So that based on the human footprint inventory for ABMI, and we clearly see where the flow is directed. That's where you have like the most natural areas remain. And especially Calgary appears very dark here, like a dark pole. That's just because there's not much natural feature remaining. But if you look from a species perspective, you actually see that they are occurring still in this But anyway, with all of these formats, we overlay them to have one single presentable map for the planners. We presented it to them just to get feedbacks on what's feasible, and we adjusted like a few parameters. For example, we dropped the very small parcels, right, for 1 hectare large, but think nothing much about it. Also yet. What we do not present here, just because we don't have time to go into details, is that we also overlay the core areas that I was talking to you about. When we consider core areas here, the parcels that were very unlikely to be developed. So the planners told us, okay, like municipal reserves, crown lands, provincial parks, and whatever was not zoned to be developed, we consider they were like natural habitats and they're suitable for the 3 species we're talking about. And so they are core habitats. So here we overlay them on top of the corridor maps. The light greens is actually the areas where you have a higher likelihood of current flow, and this is what we showed to the planners. And they were happy about it because and we also put the road network on top of it, the main highways, and that was very relevant because then Tracy did a cluster analysis of animal vehicle collision to see where there was hotspots of animal vehicle collisions that aligned with the areas we have like more connectivity. And it's more like to think in the future, if there's like ever money to build some mitigations structures, this is where we're going to have like to prioritize the constructions of these structures, because that's where there's like the higher likelihood of vehicle collisions, but also so that's like a pro and for motorist safety, right, and biodiversity conservations. And yes, essentially like here, because that's where you have more animals more plants. Yeah. And so this ecological network was actually successfully integrated into the MDP. We found out recently, found it 2 weeks ago, right?
September 2025.
Yeah. And so you see these like the maps. So the map that we just showed you with the ecological corridors, and this is a snapshot of their website. And they call it environmental areas, not really corridors. But they still talk about we need to retain ecological networks and ensure construction best practices are followed. What I did not tell you is that we also had like a step ahead because the planners were very communicative and very engaging with us and very excited. It was very, like a pleasure to work, at least with work with you. And they gave us layers. They told us where the areas were zoned to be developed in the future. So for example, residential areas, solar gravel pits and solar farms, right? And so even though they appear natural right now on the landscape, we still could take into account into the connectivity modeling to ensure that the corridors would not pass through this area. They would have like to they would go around it basically. So it's more realistic and feasible to ensure this can be protected in the future, rather than if we like, okay, actually here there's going to be like residential areas developed. I think this is for this case study.
Question for you online. How do you assign where the breakpoints are in a circuitscape model values between pinch point, diffuse, and barrier?
That's based on the how do you assign? Like here, for example?
I don't get it.
Well, that's a magic of the algorithm, I would say, that shows where the higher values are.
So there's two approaches to this. So when you just look at the current density map that is produced for modeling, this relative values, because each pixel is kind of the relative contribution to the spread of that flow at the context of the map itself. So it's not the particular cell itself, it's the contribution of that cell to the surroundings, right? So just looking at it from this perspective, these are kind of, the cutoffs where you see according to the color rank itself, but there are other ways when you apply standardizations. People have looked into things that are meaningful from application perspective is when you standardize it and you look at values that are within one standard deviation or more than one standard deviation, like 2 standard deviations. And these values became or will determine what is that pinch point or what is that ecological gradient. The absolute value itself per pixel is not as meaningful as its contribution to the surroundings or the larger scale flow in a specific.
Can I add to that from a practical application? This is a big conversation. And we have tended to actually speak with people on the ground that have good knowledge of the area to make those breakpoints. And there's a paper by Cameron et al. That's around about California where they played around and figured out how you should break, diffuse, channelized, and impeded. And so I think there's a huge conversation going on around this right now to kind of make it systematic. So I'll just put that out there. But for us, we have spent some time on the ground talking to people to make sure that it made sense.
And is it the same for each species?
We did that for the structural, so I don't know for this species.
I guess if you work at the species specific level, normally it's like your knowledge, knowledge as an expert, so you're further. Here
we standardized, we used the Z4, and we standardized across the different species in the structural as the main.
It was like, yeah, like consequently, it was like more relative to the entire connectivity of the area.
But I think this is a really important dialogue because as you look at this over time and you change, maybe you restore some areas or you lose more areas, the map is relative to itself in categorizing, right? So I think this is a really important conversation around like having that, Sam talked about having that base, that you're like your base layer that's just as if nothing was there. I'm not explaining it very well, but I think this is a really important that's a really important question. And a nuanced one. I think the answer is very nuanced.
And it's application context that like we've seen, for example, with creative value conservation. When these maps were produced, they were classified, so there were certain cutoffs that speaks to their needs in the context of the natural heritage system itself in that location, right? And there were some classes that were applied. A classification scheme to the values of current density there to kind of, set these limits of what is relevant, what is more important in terms of, like a thematic map more than, current flow.
All right, so the second case study that we wanted to talk to you about was an effort to inform or recommend a highway mitigation system on the Trans-Canada Highway in the grassland region in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So this particular project is supporting a pronghorn crossing initiative, which is a collaborative between Miistakis, the Alberta Conservation Association, and the Canadian Wildlife Federation as the main partners. But we also have representatives from the government of Alberta and the government of Saskatchewan, both transportation and environment people. And we also have the Nature Conservancy, both Alberta and Saskatchewan staff that have been supportive of this project. So the study area that we were interested in is from Brooks, Alberta, along the Trans-Canada to Swift Current, Saskatchewan. And again, the objective here was to design or recommend a road mitigation system that would be thoughtful around multi-grassland species. And so we're worried about this highway, not only from a direct mortality of wildlife. So if you're a species at risk, like a swift fox or a rattlesnake or a badger, direct mortality on the road is probably one of the most limiting factors for that species that we're trying to recover. So we need to start addressing this challenge. But we're also concerned about it from a behavioral avoidance perspective. This landscape still has migrating pronghorn species, which means that one of their life strategies is to migrate during the spring and fall. In the spring, they follow the green up. So as things green up, they migrate farther north, sometimes from Montana, Alberta, Saskatchewan, up across the Highway 1. And we're really concerned that there's behavioral avoidance because of this highway. The traffic volumes on that stretch of road are between 24,000 and 6,000 a day. In other areas, pronghorn have stopped moving across highways that are at 5,000 vehicles a day. So we might actually right now be stopping the migration of pronghorn across because of the Trans-Canada Highway. Like, I can't state how concerning this is. We're gonna find out soon because we have a big collaring project, but if these pronghorn behave the same way as pronghorn in other areas, we are in trouble. This is what the landscape looks like. So that you can see the 2-lane highway with a huge meridian in the center and a parallel railway line, and then kind of grasslands on both sides.
Yeah, so there are the pronghorns in the agricultural area behind that fence, because Tracy hasn't said they're like barbed wire fence also from pronghorn movements. And the idea was, yeah, we know that it's a problem to pronghorn migrations, but to convince the provinces to build wildlife overpass or any mitigation structures, it's more appealing. It's also suiting to other species, especially those that are risk to motorist drivers, basically. That's what I mean. And so, at first, pronghorn connectivity model was done based on telemetry data from Introductory. So this was included, maybe, yeah. Right? So from Montana, I think. And you clearly see where there's like higher flow of pronghorns moving and crossing the highway. So that's why it's like these light green areas. And this is where some potential sites for building structures were identified based on these plants, and it's the border of Saskatchewan. So there's like a bunch of, like 50 in total, right? And okay. And so then we've also done it for other species, like the badger, which is a much less mobile species, although they do move quite a lot. And there are species at risk. So we didn't data from Saskatchewan, but they are very rare. So we only model the productivity for the Alberta. And you actually see that when there's like higher probability of movements of badger, this is not based on movement data. This is again based on the occurrence data because there's like the paucity of data. But it's still aligned very well with where the potential structures might be built in the future. So we won't find these balance. And the new deer, a very common area. So this is like but more generally species. By here that very diffuse, right? The connectivity. It's not very tunnel like with the pronghorns or with the badger. It's much more in many different places. But anyway, where there was like structures identified, potential structures identified, it's also aligned with higher connectivity values. And in Saskatchewan, that's like a lower resolution model because again of the data available. I don't know why it was pretty low here. Why? But again, there's no again high connectivity aligned with where the structures are. And then to make it easier again for the planners and or wherever this is going to be presented to, a single map was done. So there was like an overlay of different connectivity models in Alberta. There was also a previous rattlesnake model that was done by Miistakis. So the mule, the badger, the pronghorns, and the structural connectivity models. And for Saskatchewan, that was based on mule deer, pronghorns, and structural connectivity. And this is a final map that was used to identify whether it's like higher likelihood of movement for different species and which might benefit not just the pronghorns, but also the species in the landscape.
So if you remember, our goal was to recommend a road mitigation system. And so we took that overlay map that Ninon just presented and we intersected it with the highway. And so we looked at what are the connectivity values within a buffer around different highway kilometers or from Brooks to Swift Current. And what you're seeing on the top plot there is a display of the top 10%. So in other words, if we're worried about grassland species in the Trans-Canada, multiple species, these are good places to start in terms of the importance of connectivity.
Just a question.
And just thinking now, but do we even have any overpasses in the grasslands at all? Is it only?
We don't, we have lots of bridge structures and culverts that can be retrofitted, but we don't currently have overpasses. We do in other landscapes, like in Wyoming. There's a number of overpasses that have been built specifically for pronghorn migration.
Do you have to make your why, just because of the long supply?
It's cost, and I'm gonna talk about that in just a minute. We go back. I'm gonna come back to your question because I think I kind of answered it. So the top map, if you remember, red is where it's most important from a movement perspective, from a connectivity predictive modeling. But the middle map is animal vehicle collision clusters. And so this is where you have a motorist safety risk or a concern. It's predominantly driven by deer if you look at that data. Okay, and so what this is showing us is if you are a transportation agency, what do you worry about? What's your mandate? You worry about motorist safety risk. And so in Alberta in particular, we have a mechanism to build crossing structures because of motorist safety risk. But we don't have a platform for building structures for species conservation. That's really important nuanced point that I just made there. The last map shows you where they align. And so if you look at where we think connectivity for grassland species needs to be, and where motorist safety risks are a concern, you can see on the last map, it's hard to see, but there's very little overlap between those two things. And yet the driver for investment in building these crossing structures is motorist safety risk. So we as conservationists have to figure out a way to make it important to be investing in restoration solutions that aren't always about motorist safety risk. And we certainly want them to be prioritizing choices based on where there's good alignment between the two where possible. So this ended up in a road mitigation system with 21 different sites that address both motorist safety. Some of them address motorist safety, some of them address nexus. So you can see each point here, and the table tells you, the far one, number 1 near Brooks, is really a motorist safety risk issue, whereas 2 and 3 actually support complement grassland species, but are not a motorist safety risk issue. So this table kind of helps you understand if you build a complete system and where we're trying to address both of these needs. And then the ones that are outlined in a thicker purple are prioritized based on the ground work that took place with the Pronghorn Crossing project that included transportation engineers. So how feasible is it to build here? It included biologists. How important is this biologically now that we're on the ground? Land ownership. County development plans, like, is this an area that's slated for development or not, kind of thing. So when you take all those things into consideration, it enabled us to kind of prioritize where we want to start. And then this is a new infographic that's not released that my colleague Nilo, who's here today, worked on. And this is to try to say, hey, we need to invest. If we want to save our grasslands and reduce species fragmentation for grassland species, we have to start investing in these systems. And Dialogue Engineering built this prototype for us of what it would look like on our landscape to have an overpass situated. And this is for us really, because there's no mechanism to fund these types of things, this is for us to try to start that dialogue with governments and hopefully private partnerships. Thank you.
Able to answer some of them. The first one was, how did you determine the boundaries of core areas and corridors?
So the core areas, we had the layers which were exactly what the patches that were going to be undeveloped. So these are the ones that we use as core areas, and they often overlap with the corridors that we identified.
Yeah, so that's an important trade-off, right? It's not an ecologically based size of the habitat or quality of habitat. It's in a very fast changing landscape. The trade-off is we selected core areas that were least likely to be developed as identified by municipal representatives. So
it's not based on the habitat quality.
Yeah.
It's often used in other exercises. In that case, it was just because we knew they were going to remain natural, they could accommodate the super species.
Okay. The next one is Taking things a step further, has there been any work on incorporating climate change scenarios into connectivity mapping so we aren't just managing for landscapes now, but into the future?
So we did not do that, but some,
Yeah.
definitely with pronghorn, I think, so they've been, yes.
So I think I responded, but then, yeah, so climate change, there's a really good, interesting study that was done in the Biodiversity, like around Montreal region. A paper by Alberta, I think a few years ago. And they used the habitat network approach, and they they used some kind of synthetic species attributes, but they like really thought about had these more species specific attributes for a few select pseudo species or so. And they had scenarios of land use change and scenarios of climate change for their region. I mean, again, that's maybe the size of the Greater Calgary region or so. And when you look at the results, it's really clear that the impact, like the difference between these climate change scenarios, or between now and the climate change scenario, that effect is on the network, the connectivity is much smaller than the land use change. So in absence of land use change, yes, but like if we have land use change going on, that's the much more pressing thing. And so I would say, what is really important again to keep in mind is that we're not just managing this area. We need to look at this, zoom out, you know, up to the continental level. In general, things will try to move north here.
Yeah,
So we really need to maintain those connections, like from prairies to parkland to the boreal forest, along the the foothills that in general ecological flow can move. And then the other thing is like we really want to think like having the connectivity at a smaller scale in general, but then but like maintain that large scale connectivity for ecological flow, I think would be my recommendation. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Just a quick question, it's likely an engineering question. When you're working with municipalities and you're developing your models, what opportunity you give to the community or to any traditional knowledge to incorporate that on the ground feedback, just to truth out your models? Is there an opportunity? And I guess I'm speaking of bias specifically to Augusta County, because we have a ranch just for that lake there. And we see a wildlife corridor for sure. It's interesting on one of our roads. It is a corridor where we see a lot of traffic. That's being impacted by deer specifically, deer death. So yeah, my question is, I haven't heard of it myself through our county. Is there an opportunity for stakeholders to come and treat out in model?
Yes, maybe you can give me your contact, because then it, like they said, this is the beginning of the journey.
Yeah.
And we're super thrilled that Rocky View got it in. Like, we think that's, to me, that's a massive success. I know like it's hard to operationalize these things, but that's the start, right? Because it enables dialogue. So we do have future workshops planned to try to talk about a coordinated approach for the whole region. And right now we're going around to smaller groups and presenting this and getting their feedback. So we started with a bunch of the groups in Rocky View just because there's been more interest, but let's set up a meeting and have a conversation.
Yeah, it's fantastic, but yeah, the downside is if you get the county to accept it, that's fantastic, but then it's blocked by concrete over here for 20 years, right? So if you didn't get things right on the front end, we have 20 years of poor planning that's going on, and they're not always as open to doing anything that's not in.
I would argue that right now we're planning without anything, and so at least getting something in there is, I keep arguing, like, we have, like, it's so difficult as modelers and scientists to say, we're gonna put a map in there. It's so difficult, but I think we have to start doing it and help educate people that the map has to evolve as we learn more. Because
it's so frustrating to go to council, like when, you know, you have an agricultural owner that wants to subdivide and become residential. Providing on the map that they finally put out.
Yeah.
In the 2000s, trying to break it out into areas.
Yeah.
But still, it depends who's at council that day. And who,
yes.
I mean, I've got to speak about groundwater. I'm an engineer, not a groundwater geologist. But if you can convey your message and swing some votes,
you get whatever, your revised, take on it, passed, right? And that's not really a scientifically sound.
That is how decision making is made every day. That
Yeah.
what you just said is actually how decisions are being made. So what role can we play in helping to guide those decisions or inform those decisions?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's so rapid.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just my only feedback is to have that on the ground feedback, just to improve that in your models, right?
Yeah, thank you. That's really valuable.
I'd like to add something to that based on what we've heard this morning, about like how these models work and simplifying assumptions. So we think about least cost path, the ideal path, or the current density, like that, where any possible path is taking into account, just some paths are more likely than others. So that's the current density maps. The current density maps will show you different alternatives. So those are really good to say, okay, if we're gonna lose this, we can strengthen this or like we can build in redundancy. It's not, it gives you options. Whereas if you do a habitat network and just look for the best path between any pair of neighboring protected areas or so, then it comes across as being prescriptive. It has to go through there. Now the same can happen, like if we interpret those kind of alternative potential ways, and we take like that was the map you got into that municipal plan, right? But you shouldn't think of that as being a clearly delineated path and that being prescriptive. So think of it, if this wall is my landscape and this is something that is not permeable. The flow goes from here to there. What will it do? It will kind of divert around here. So at this corner, you'll have the highest ecological flow, kind of the third to have a pinch point. But the animals are not going to likely go around here, right here. They might go around here a bit further away, right? Because the edge effects, or we don't take into account really quality here or so. So these details are not being used. So this should not be interpreted as being prescriptive and like here it is, but like somewhere here it should go through. And I think that is really hard to get across. But on the other hand, that's why we thought these kind of maps would be a really good starting point for discussion. We see somewhere here we need to have something, and then the local knowledge would be really important to know. We know they go actually, 200 meters further here. That's where they go through, and then refine it. In the ideal world, that's what I would suggest to happen.
So that's what they do, I think, with tigers and elephants, when you have the very charismatic species and jaguar, typically across Latin America. But yeah, right now, like Tracy said, that was like a start, right?
Well, and also I think it's really important to say the planning staff have all the maps that they show.
Yeah.
So when they're planning on a smaller scale, they can look at details. But what goes out to public is what we showed you in that map, right? Like that needs to be, we keep hearing over and over, it needs to be simple. We just need to socialize the concept. And we need people to understand what we mean when we say a connected landscape. And so there's kind of different products depending on the purpose as well, which I think we didn't express. But.
Yeah. We also added like reservoir conservation easement plans.
Which we didn't display today for obvious reasons, but it's really, really bloody impressive when you add on the private land conservation.
And do you think, so speaking of easements, but also looking at grazing leases, for example, is that something that the province is looking at in terms of its executive unit?
Kate?
The grazing, sorry?
I'm pointing out Kate here.
I don't think I'm the best person to answer that, honestly. Yeah, but that would be great.
Could we say that the province is aware that some of the grazing leases play important roles in connectivity?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
There's one more question from online. It just asks, does the highway have to be fenced in order to implement an overpass? And do we know if animals would use the overpass given free choice?
Fencing is very important because it's what funnels them to the overpass. And we have very good success of many different species using crossing structures to get safely over the highway. So pronghorn seem to prefer overpasses, but there are some experiments right now to see if they'll use a really wide underpass, which might theoretically be cheaper than an overpass. So I think we feel confident that animals will use these structures. But design elements and location are important.
And then sometimes you cross the river valley with a bridge and that makes this kind of, that is it, an underpass, that is an underpass.
Suddenly it's an underpass.
One last question that just had come in. What are the public engagements and is there access to conservation easements if they can be aware of the leases that are causing these barriers?
Sure, I understand the question.
The conservation easement sound up.
What are the public engagements? And is there access to conservation easements if they can be aware of the leases that are causing these barriers? Sure.
Not sure I understand the question, but private land conservation is extremely important, especially in many areas, because they enable potentially transportation to build these mitigation structures. So for example, on the Trans-Canada, it's mostly private land. So if we don't have some type of agreement with the landowner or protection of that land guaranteed, then the investment doesn't make sense. So private land conservation is important for many reasons, but in this one case.
Also stepping stones. Yeah. Sometimes they're like pretty small, like, yeah, like they're also, but then like they really appear as stepping stone, like in the middle of two bigger patches. So
what I would have understood here is like if somebody is in charge of leasing out the land and realizing that this is kind of not helping biodiversity, if they wouldn't lease it out, would they be able to get easement? Compensation, something like that, or what's the process? Or I don't know whether I understood it right. That would make sense to me. Question.
I don't know if someone from Nature Conservancy is here. Is there someone from the land trust community who could answer that?
Yeah, it's for someone online. They were just asking, is there access to conservation easements if they can be aware of the leases that are causing the barriers?
Yes, we're going to access to conservation. I would have to think on it more in reverse.
You mind repeating that for the?
Yeah, they wouldn't.
Okay, so there is access to conservation easements, but you would have to check on if, what about it, what the grazing easements?
I'll have a bunch of these questions.
Okay,
Right. Then.
okay, yeah, we'll try to respond in the chat, maybe.
Have you moved on?
Hey, I think so.
Okay, thanks for that. There's a case study presentation.
All right. So thanks everyone for staying post lunch. I'll try to make this exciting so you don't slip into the post lunch coma.
It will be exciting.
Yes, absolutely. So I will be co-presenting on the more applied side of things using connectivity modeling for conservation in the Kainai Reserve. So I'm going to be going through some slides and then afterwards I'll turn it over to Alvin and he will talk about some maps and kind of how he sees the usefulness in this information and what will be helpful moving forward. Okay. So just a little very briefly about the project context. This is a case study part of the larger Alliance Grant project that Helen introduced in the beginning. And we're really trying to help bridge this gap between kind of the academic research we do at universities and make it useful to people who are actually managing the landscape. And particularly, we're trying to make these kind of larger scale current density type models applicable to managing at the municipal level and at these smaller scales. And we have many people who have been involved in this, showing interest in various aspects throughout. Many of whom are here today, including Conservation Ontario, Nature Conservancy Canada, the Alberta government, ABMI, of course, the Blood Tribe, Prairie Conservation Forum, who is kindly hosting, and Samantha, who is taking care of all the tech. So thank you very much for that. And the Miistakis, of course. So you've seen these before, and we're talking about these kind of large scale current density models. And so there's a bit of a gap, I think, between, okay, we have these amazing, huge, colorful models. How can we put those to use in a way that makes sense on the landscape for decision making? Okay. And while it's amazing to have these kind of big picture models, they're a little difficult to interpret and apply to the smaller scales, which is where a lot of decision making is made. And so if we zoom in on our study area in southern Alberta, the Kainai Reserve here, we can take a look right here. Okay, we can see we have some of these paths highlighted, these biodiversity highways, ecological flow, whatever you want to call them, through this area. And there's been, as we've heard, some confusion and difficulty interpreting, right? You have diffuse areas versus pinch points versus barriers. And so how do you know what to pull from this? And so we wanted to really highlight those areas, areas of flow. And so if you just pull those out using standard deviations, we can highlight them and take a look. And so you have this kind of large scale metrics here, but if you're concerned with managing the Kainai Reserve, you don't have a lot of information to work with yet. So the main objectives for this project within the reserve are kind of very basic, I think, at the plot level, common goals. So we want to know where are important areas of habitat, where are important ecological pathways, and how can we kind of prioritize our landscape. So identifying high priority areas for conservation or potentially restoration. So particularly in Alberta, where you have these massive landscapes and some like limited resources, how do we best direct and apply those on the landscape and to our decision making? And to answer these questions, I'm using a program software called Conscape. And in this talk, I'm going to keep it kind of as conceptual as I can and not go into the technical stuff too much. We'll get into that a little bit later. And for those of you who are familiar, it's kind of a blend of conifer and circuit-safe style approaches. And so some of the cool things about this program is I find it to be very holistic and integrating habitat quality as well as habitat configuration activity with a lot of biological realism behind it. And so it has a pretty flexible program. It can address a variety of goals, but for now, I just want to talk about it in a very general approach. This is what we used in this project. Okay, so you have two main inputs, habitat quality and habitat permeability. And so the first one, habitat quality, you have to define what habitat is for your goal and your organism. And we took the species agnostic approach where we just use the naturalness. So how natural is this area, or is it having a very intense human footprint? So based on kind of the same methodology that you heard Hossam talking about earlier today. Okay. And then our secondary input, permeability. We chose the yeah. The human footprint of this building is not impeding. So the permeability input, if depending on the goal of your study, you can choose an entirely different. It could be probability of movement, survivorship, mortality, anything you want. We kept it super simple, matching our species agnostic approach, and just did resistance based. So that typical law of transformation, and I'll show you a little bit what that looks like. But the cool part about Conscape is that it gives you these two very nice outputs. So the authors of this program coined this term habitat functionality. Okay, and so this is a really nice blend of kind of habitat focused and configuration focused approaches, and it kind of puts them together in this one map for you. And so you don't have to. I find it simpler to interpret than a current density map, but that's me. So it depends on what you're more familiar with. But it gives you basically a map of not only good quality habitat, but it also represents how well connected it is to other good quality habitat. And then they have this secondary output called movement flow, which really highlights those ecological pathways. And so if you combine those, you can really get a good idea of how these different areas contribute to landscape connectivity in different ways. And so I'm going to move on to talking about the inputs that we used for this study. So the first input is habitat quality or naturalness. Okay? And this was made using, again, the ABMI human footprint inventory from 2021. And so we basically just reverse that. So using values from the Merrick et al. Paper, we basically classified how intense human footprint it is in the landscape and then reversed it. So values of 1 here, the dark green, represent areas where there's little to no human footprint influence on the landscape. And then as those values decrease, you have increasing levels of human footprint. So this is the reserve here. And then this white patch up here, that's Lethbridge, right? So it's very built up, it's very white, and so you have values near 0. Right? And you're probably wondering why there's like lines and such through the reserves. And that's because these data are very new and I haven't had the chance to clean up those boundaries yet. So these are taken directly from the Canada, like National First Nations boundaries shapefile. And the major highways through the reserves are maintained by the province. And so Kainai don't have like first use of those. So those lines don't show up. That's what those lines are. They represent basically provincial cared for areas like roads and canals and such. Okay. So we have this naturalness data, and we're going to talk about more in detail about how we made that later in the coding section. But for now, we'll move on to our secondary input, which is the resistance. And so basically we just took this map, applied a log scale transformation, and you can kind of see how it's a little bit opposite. So where you have really good dark green habitats, you tend to have really low resistance. We have polar human influenced habitat, like Lethbridge, have really high resistance in red. So this is essentially, like you really only needed one data set for this, and then just created your resistance map from that. So this is kind of the simplest use of Conscape that we could dream of. And so we come to our little Conscape machine here, and we take our 2 inputs, we plug them in, and we calculate our habitat functionality. And that map looks like this. So habitat functionality is a pixel-based value, and it's weighted by how well connected the pixel is and the habitat quality. Yes.
Just to connect to the provincial indicator, you can think of, because this is not based on a habitat network where you delineate the habitat patch, but it is based on raster pixels. So if you have, I don't know, what's your resolution here? 200 meters. So we have a cell of 200 by 200 meters, and the value of this cell is pretty much the equivalent area of highest point of habitat that would be directly surrounding that cell.
And that area directly surrounding is based on a kind of dispersal distance, this alpha parameter that we'll explore later. So it has that distance around the cell has biological relevance that you get to determine based on your context. Okay. Okay. And so these higher values indicate, good habitat that is very well connected. And you'll see that there's going to be some boundary anomalies around these edges because it's based on somewhat on connectivity here. And these cells at the boundary, they don't have as many cells surrounding them as cells in the center. And so it's not super obvious here, but it will be in a moment. But you do get some boundary effects. And so we will deal with that in the future and expand the study area if we can. Okay, so once again, we have this kind of field quantitative map that can be a little arbitrary in terms of decision making. So we can simplify it. Backing up. So you can see how this habitat functionality map gives us more information than this natural just input map, right? So here this tells us where good quality habitat is, but that's only part of the picture. Because if you're an animal moving through the landscape, it's not just quality that matters, it's also how well connected that is. And so if you have areas that are very well connected, it'll show up as not as functional on this map. Okay, So now moving on to kind of simplifying this map to really highlight the best areas here and simplify it for decision making, we can simply apply some thresholds. Okay, and so what you see here is this yellow is we took the top 5% of functional habitat cells and just applied them all to this yellow. And excellent, the top 10%, in green, good, 75 to 90%, and then for the lowest 50%. And here you can see those kind of boundary effects coming in towards the edge. Okay. So those are entirely arbitrary percentages that we used. So later on in this project, I'll show you kind of how we create this map. And if you want to change those, you totally can. So keep this in mind. It'll come back in a moment. Because now that we have our functionally connected habitat map, and we have this really good simplified area where we have really good functionally connected habitat kind of between these Annie? We can now take a look at the movement flow or dispersal pathways, which is the secondary output of Conscape here. So I come back to our Conscape machine, we plug in our new inputs, we calculate the movement flow, and we'll walk through this. I'm breezing through it now, but we'll go over it in the code later. And we can look at those corridors or potential corridors, as we say. And we see we have some nice highlighted routes here. And to visualize this a little bit better, we can just extract the top 10%. And we get a map like this. Okay. So this is really cool because you get a lot more detail in this area, both in terms of maintaining connectivity through the reserve, but also coordinating with the surrounding area. And you can see that a lot of it follows the riverways. So there's a river that follows the western edge of the reserve here. And it's hidden a little bit by the border, but that's there. Okay. And even in Lethbridge, there's a corridor that kind of follows this river valley here, which is cool. So we can kind of synthesize this map and take the best habitats from each that we've made so far. So from our naturalness map, where is this natural habitat data? So we can extract just those values of 1. So where are the areas with no human footprint? Like, okay, this is the best quality habitat, but where is the best functionally connected habitat? And then we can take that yellow and overlay it. Like, okay, so this is the best quality. This is the best quality in terms of connectivity. And then we can also take a look at these movement flow pathways and overlay those on top. And you can see that we have some good habitat as well as functionally connected and some important pathways kind of coming between these two reserves here, which is great. And they're extending as well lower to the south and to those timberlands, which is very cool. Okay. So this kind of map is very cool. It's easy to interpret for somebody who isn't used to looking at landscape activity maps. So it's very easy to explain and hopefully to apply. And it really helps us disentangle how different areas contribute to not just habitat area, but also quality and functionality and how that relates to these movement flow pathways. So it really allows you to take all of those and kind of overlay them into one map. Okay. So this is not so different, I think, from at least conceptually from what Tracy were creating that kind of habitat network map that's kind of simplified and for the public or somebody who's not used to looking at these. So that's a different approach, and I think depending on your context, it can be a good option. So if we zoom back out, so we have these regional ecological flow pathways that came from those big current density models. And now we can kind of fill in those gaps in there using Fundscape and this more kind of detailed approach, which I think is very cool. And I'm not going to try to interpret that. Alvin will do that for you because he's the one more familiar with the area. For those of you who don't know, I live in Toronto and I've been doing this modeling from downtown Toronto, basically. And I just got to see the reserve for the first time in person today. So that's helping me put things in context, and it's a very beautiful place. So with this, we can identify and prioritize conservation, not just in the reserve, but also pathways in and out, and maybe coordinate with those surrounding areas. And so next steps for this project, if we can, reduce those boundary effects and get a finer resolution and, conduct this analysis for a range of dispersal distances. So yes, they are species agnostic models, but we can play with that dispersal distance to make them apply a little bit better to different groups. And, potentially explore a species specific option or, yeah, and if we can extend into the US a little bit, that would be really interesting as well. But, okay, I'm going to stop talking now and do a new share and turn it over to Alvin, who will explain the map and what it's a little bit better. Thank you.
Hello. So yeah, if you want to put the map layers on, and then I'll just go through the application. So yeah, basically the lines there are roads that Alberta manages, and the layers that we've been able to develop, it really gives us a good indication on where wildlife are moving through. So it'll help us with our wildlife monitoring, whether that's for hunting or pinch points for high collision areas. This year, there's been a lot of collisions with deer, and eventually we want to put some overpasses or underpasses that will assist with ungulate movement or even carnivore movement. So yeah, the different layers, as we look at them, they assist us with placement of ARUs and wildlife cameras. So we could monitor the movement of, well, we've been seeing a concentration of grizzly bears in our southern portion, so we could verify if these are actual locations that they're moving across the landscape. So this just gives us a good idea of where we could place cameras or where we could focus our monitoring for different wildlife, whether it's carnivores or deer, the occasional moose and elk. But really help us with our coexistence for the carnivore species, and then help protect them, and then for planning for the overpasses and underpasses. Eventually, we want to look at having movement corridors for our bison, and that having a corridor that would move from our timber limits to our main reserve. And this will help us plan that, look at ways that we could work with landowners off reserve and on reserve on how we could make a bison corridor that moves from our reserve to our timber limits. And then also assist us with the Blackfeet Nation with their bison. They're looking at having transboundary, I guess, one that would move from the Blackfeet Nation into Waterton. And this will help us kind of focus our efforts on if there's pinch points where they could move onto private land, so where we could keep them from doing that, but then also help them move back and forth from the Waterton area back down south into Glacier Park and the Blackfeet Nation. So really try to support that bison conservation and free roaming bison on the landscape. So yeah, there's many applications. We've been able to kind of focus our efforts in looking at ways to expand it in the future, especially for planning. There's so much planning that we could do for our wildlife and for our own safety. So this, really exciting tool that we've been able to utilize here.
Alvin was just mentioning, it's just south of the border, and that's in the US. And then the timberlands are just down here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
encouraging bison movements, north-south between those reserves would be a huge thing for the next, 10, 20 years of development.
Yeah. And then assist with bison conservation. Yeah, really exciting. I think that's all I have. If there's any feedback or anything that anybody first, Celia, if you have anything to add.
So we'll get into some of the aspects of landscape a little bit later, but some things to mention for these maps is that it's not complete random movement like in current density, and it's not least cost either. It's kind of in between, which is, I think, more biologically appropriate. And the dispersal that we're trying to represent here would be, I think, roughly 10 kilometers or so. So it's a little conservative for bison, but kind of a middle of the road approach for some of the ungulates and mammals.
And linking to back to other things, what you have in the kind of lighter pink, that larger scale, the meaning of those cells that are the top ones that have, where each cell has a very high contribution to that large scale connectivity of ecological flow across the province. So that assumes like no distance limitation. But it's like that larger scale pattern, that's like a lot of that is going to go through their each cells. Whereas here, the additional ones and the darker pink here, that network, that one is filled with a landscape, mostly steady area. And it is distance weighting, so it looks like how much does a cell contribute to the connection of the connectivity of good quality habitat within a study area, but not only within the study area, but within the kind of biologically relevant distance, which you said was 10 kilometers. Yes. So it's kind of coming from the opposite end. And we see that it nicely fills in a network that we can focus on.
And that's one reason why you can argue that Conscape is a little bit better for the smaller scale work, is because you can very easily set that kind of distance representation versus a lot of, not all, but a lot of current density models assume kind of infinite dispersal capability, which is good in terms for, cross-continental or really large scale modeling where you're talking about, generations of animal movement across the landscape versus this is a little more smaller scale.
We see any comparisons on a small scale where to run something with certainty and landscape?
I have not. They're different methods. It's not exactly the same. So the paths in Conscape it says that they don't go between nodes, right? So, Hossam was talking earlier about how, circuitscape, it's modeled like an electrician's circuit board, where you have sources and sinks, and it goes from, even the omnidirectional one, it goes from, you know, every node to every other node. Conscape, calculates paths between every possible pair of pixels, right? So it's, you get a very detailed look. It's very computationally extensive. And also the way that the paths are generated and simulated is a little bit different. So they're called random shortest paths, fitted with an MC algorithm that I can't remember the details of right now. But the gist is that those paths are not infinite. They are restricted by the distance transformation, that's dispersal, that you set. On my computer, which is there we go. And they have the ability, they're not guaranteed to make it to their destination. So they have like path depth and cell rescue. So they're not guaranteed to go a certain distance. They can go partway and stop and stay there, or they can go partway and die. So they're, yes.
I think you're gonna go into those things the next.
Yes, I'm getting
right?
into
So
the
let's
next
not take that as it. But with the question like comparison, the thing is,
It's a little bit apples and oranges.
yeah, because the other one, Circuitscape does use the random walk. Whereas here in Conscape, you can do anything. You can do random walk, you can do the least cost path and anything in between. So you would have to compare certain settings of that rather than this method to that method. Yeah, and again, that goes into the next part. So I
Yes,
think we should exactly thanks Ian and Alvin for this presentation.